Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Hector and I'm initially from San Diego. My father is Canadian and my mother is from Philadelphia originally. My Bigfoot encounter happened in 1986 when I was 14 years old in Alberta in Canada. I grew up in a rather squalid and run-down high-rise apartment block in downtown San Diego, a single child with two really dreadful parents. I do not say that lightly, because I don't wish to be unkind about the two people that raised me in the very early part of my life. You see, my father was a very quiet, unassuming man who never said a single word, and he was ruled by an iron rod by my hot-headed mother. My mother was a monster. I knew of no other word to describe her. Every word that came out of her mouth was vile, vulgar, and obscene. And every time she spoke, it would be a swear word or she would curse everything and everyone, and invariably find herself caught up in all kinds of neighbourhood disputes and squabbles. It was not uncommon to find my mother having a huge barmy or fight with another woman, which would invariably always involve physical altercations that meant pulling of hair and heavy punching, bloody noses, and sometimes broken parts of the body like wrists and ankles. It was never ending. I was one of my mother's best punching bags, and whenever she was mad at me, or with anybody in the world, I was the one that was the target of all this beating. She would beat me black and blue with a huge leather belt, and my father would just sit back watching without saying a word. Looking back, I think he was afraid of my bullying mother, but never once did he ever intervene on my behalf or stick up for me. It did not help that my parents were very poor and money was hard to come by. Much of it was spent on weed, which my parents loved to smoke. They would while away the long monotonous hours in a stoned state. Sometimes at the grand age of 14, I truly felt like the only adult in our home. I hate to tell you that I didn't love my parents, but resented and despised them. In hindsight, being that much older, I don't have that same amount of animosity towards them, and I choose to forgive them, because I don't want to give them the satisfaction of living my life with bitterness and hatred towards them. My mother had always told me that I was the biggest inconvenience in her life, and she wished I had never been born. You have no idea how that shatters your confidence and self-esteem as a child growing up. It certainly did for me. One day I decided enough was enough and I was going to run away. And that was the day, armed with my meagre savings in a small suitcase, I boarded a Greyhound bus that was heading towards Vancouver. I was surprised that nobody asked me any awkward questions. But if anyone was going to ask me anything, I was going to tell them that I was visiting an aunt of mine in Canada. Luckily, I did even have an envelope with her address on it, because I really did have an aunt who was living there. I was lucky that I was a tall kid and looked very much older than my 14 years of age. I still remember sitting on that bus which was a long 21-hour journey to Vancouver. And as we drove further and further away from San Diego, I could feel a sense of huge relief wash over my body, like a gentle, refreshing rain shower. I had no idea what I was going to do once I got to Vancouver. But you know what? I didn't really care. Sleeping in a cardboard box on a street corner was infinitely more preferable than living in a high-rise apartment block with my abusive mother and my dead quiet father. I was sitting next to a very nice gentleman on the bus who told me that he was being picked up by his brother in Vancouver, who would be driving all the way to Alberta. I wasted no time in asking this gentleman for a ride. I didn't even know where Alberta was, but I figured if it was good enough for him, it was good enough for me. So I lied and I told him my aunt lived there, and he eagerly accepted my request, saying that it would be a pleasure to give me a lift. Fast forward a couple of days, and I had been living rough in the Alberta countryside for a couple of days. I'd been sleeping under the stars in a beautiful clearing in the open wilderness, and had infinitely more fun than I'd had in the first 14 years of my life in that high-rise apartment block with my parents. I had run out of money. Nothing was left in the world for me, when quite suddenly a woman approached me, just out of the blue like that. She was in her 60s with a smooth white skin, grey curly hair, and bright blue twinkling eyes that were so full of life and mischief. "I can smell a runaway a mile off," she said, looking at me curiously. My mouth dropped open. How did she know, I wondered? Was it that obvious? Was she going to tell the police about me? "Come with me," she said. "You look like you could do with a good meal inside you, and a decent wash wouldn't hurt either." The lady took me to her cabin in the Alberta countryside that was a little shabby, but it was cosier and more welcoming than anything I'd ever known. Her topsy-turvy home was literally in the most remote area in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by exquisite mountainous valleys, wooded areas, beautiful lakes, and endless rambling wilderness that literally stretched back for miles on end. Fast forward a few weeks, and I have to tell you, the most extraordinary thing happened. I was now living in Alberta, Canada, with this lovely woman that I had encountered the very day that my money ran out. Talk about good luck. She had become my guardian angel, if ever I did see one. She was a remarkable, kind woman with a heart of gold, and her name was Sophia. I had told her my entire story about my abusive parents, and she was so determined to never, 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 never let me go back to that horrible San Diego apartment. "I will not have you going back to that dingy life with those dreadful abusive parents of yours," she said to me. "You deserve so much better than that." What if the police come looking for me? What if they retrace my footsteps? I mean, they'll have a record of my presence on that Greyhound bus, won't they? I said. "There are always ways and means of never being found," she said. "From now on, you're my nephew, who has come to live with me, and we'll call you Carl if anybody asks." But you know what? Nobody ever did. "If you're sure," I said. "I mean, I don't want to impose." "Absolutely not," she said. "It'll be good having your young blood around the place, and you're not imposing at all. Not at all, do you understand?" I nodded. For the first time in my young life, someone had shown me compassion and love, and tears of relief and joy poured down my face. I was to discover that Sophia had also attempted to run away from home several times, but had been dragged back kicking and screaming by the police when she was a young girl. Her parents had both been alcoholics, so I'd seemed to have found a kindred spirit who really understood my plight. From that day on, Sophia became like a real mother to me, like the mother I never had. Sophia actually dyed my blonde hair black, just in case I had been registered as a missing person, and the police came around asking awkward questions, but I'm glad to say that that never happened. Maybe my mother had never reported me missing, but was probably so thrilled to see the back of me. I guess I'll never know. Sophia had been a teacher in her younger days, so she did an amazing job in homeschooling me. In my spare time, I would always frequent the woods on her land. The woods were full of beautiful aspen trees, oaks, maples, and spruce, and they were exceedingly gorgeous, teeming with an abundance of wildlife. There was also a stunning, shimmering silver lake on the left-hand side of the valley, where I would sit for ages, hiding behind a huge rocky outcrop, and it was there that I would watch the deer congregate as they came to drink. I had seen a lynx drinking there once before, and several times I had seen elk, bison, and even the occasional black bear, and even on the odd occasion a grizzly from time to time. One day, as I was hiding behind the rocky outcrop with my binoculars pinned on the lake, something that I just loved to do, I saw the most majestic fish eagle hovering over the water like a low-flying hovercraft, and then diving down to retrieve a huge fish. I was passionate about eagles. I watched in awe as my binoculars focused on this incredible bird, tearing off the fleshy flesh from its bones and tucking into the soft meat. Suddenly I noticed that everything around the lake had retreated. Some of the elk that had been there for a while and had been drinking the water suddenly scattered away as if something had frightened them. And a little while later a black bear that had gathered there seemed to be smelling the area with his nose and didn't appear to like what he was smelling. And then he also ran away, only too eager to make a hasty escape. Everything suddenly went deathly quiet around the lake, and I'd never seen the place become that still before. It would seem that even the cheerful bird song had all but retreated, and there was a slight breeze that appeared to have dissipated all of a sudden. All I could see was the large fish eagle, who was still perching on the branch of an elm tree, looking towards the trees as if he was waiting for something or someone to appear, but I could not imagine what or who. I did wonder what was going on, and that was when I saw him, a creature that has never graced the cover of science books ever before. Well, not the ones that I've ever read. It was formidable, it was majestic, powerful, and equally as imposing as a lion and as huge as a rhino. It was a cross between a great ape and a human, and it was utterly and totally flawless and magnificent. I was awestruck by this creature and paralysed by it, but not by fear, but rather by sheer shock and horror at what I was actually seeing. I almost had to pinch myself to assure myself that I was indeed seeing this creature, and that this was not a dream. The creature was swinging its arms as it walked, and it was so graceful and majestic and agile in its movements. I noticed under its arms he appeared to be carrying something that looked like a scroll, something rolled up. Maybe it was an elk skin. What on earth was this creature, I did wonder. The creature was covered from head to toe with long human-like red-brown hair that seemed to shimmer in the sun like really healthy hair tends to do. I'm assuming the creature was male because of his monstrous size. He stood at about 9 feet tall and weighed at the very least 900 pounds. His torso was utterly massive, and his long arms that fell below the knees positively rippled with muscle. In human terminology, we would describe the creature as being absolutely ripped. But for a man to look like this, he would have to pump himself with hundreds of artificial steroids to achieve such muscular gains. I would describe this creature as a bipedal gymnast, bodybuilder, and acrobat all rolled into one. He was strong, athletic, agile, flexible, coordinated, and exceedingly powerful. His head was beautifully cone-shaped, and with the binoculars I made out a long, pink-like, hairless face, a very large flat nose, prominent brow ridge, and deep-set brown eyes. Suddenly the creature made a whistling sound that even I could hear from the other side of the lake. It was very shrill. I watched the fish eagle responding to that whistle almost immediately by flying towards the hairy humanoid and perching on his outstretched forearm. I sensed that the eagle had a relationship with the hairy man and appeared so comfortable and familiar with the creature, almost as if they were friends. He then bounced from the hairy man's forearms to his shoulders, where he perched indefinitely. I watched in total amazement as the large hairy humanoid waded through the shallower parts of the lake, with the eagle perched on his shoulders. As he did this, the fish eagle was surveying the water with his beady, predatory eyes, looking for any movement that came from beneath. And then suddenly he saw a fish in the water, and he would dart off the humanoid shoulders and just rush into the water to retrieve a fish, never ever missing. He was that good. The hairy man took out the rolled elk skin from under his arm and placed the fish into it. Every time one was caught, he would unroll the elk skin, and then he would twist it up like a bag. The fish eagle used the hairy creature's shoulders like a portable moving branch, and it seemed that they both benefited from this incredibly successful fishing arrangement that they had together. Before long, the two of them literally shared all the fish that was in the bag. The big hairy giant sat on the side of the lake, with the eagle still perched on his shoulder. He handed the eagle a fish, who started tucking into it greedily. He was now using the humanoid ape's massive shoulders like a huge tree branch, and he kept his fish in his large talons while tucking into the juicy meat. I also watched the hairy ape-like creature diving into the fish with equal gusto. He was really enjoying the meal. Once he had finished his fill, I noticed that he smacked his lips and then rolled up the elk skin tightly like a bag. I think there must have been only 1.5 fish left inside. I watched the eagle flying away. It soared into the sky majestically, and then it was gone. It was breathtakingly beautiful to watch. What an amazing bird. The hairy humanoid sat by the lake for a long while, looking reflective, almost as if he was thinking about the things he had to do, or what he was planning to eat later on. I don't know, but he looked deep in thought. He then began to throw pebbles in the water, and I watched where they landed. He was watching also, and it became a game for him that he seemed to appear to be enjoying very much. After a while, the hairy humanoid left the lake, disappearing into the woods, and I have to say, I did feel very disappointed. I had so enjoyed watching him. He was so majestic and such a powerful creature, and this had been totally the most wonderful, unexpected experience of my life, something that I was truly privileged to see. I could not wait to tell Sophia about my incredible encounter. I was just about to go when I saw something peeking at me over the rocky outcrop where I'd been hiding. It was the face of the hairy humanoid that I had just only seen moments before. He looked at me with seemingly amused brown eyes, and I did not detect an ounce of malice or hostility from the creature. Our eyes did meet for a moment, and the creature held my gaze ever so briefly, and then he walked away. And I really got the sense he was saying, "Do not think I didn't see you watching me over there with the eagle. I knew you were there all along." When I told Sophia about my encounter, she told me that she'd seen the creature before herself. One time she'd owned a dog called Paddy, a black Scottish terrier. She told me that she couldn't find him anywhere and became incredibly frantic and kept calling out for him, but she got no answer. Finally, she heard some terrified yelps, and she ran out to see that her dog was being attacked by a lone wolf, who was trying to lunge into her dog's flesh. Suddenly she heard a monstrous roar, and then she saw the humanoid ape lunging towards the wolf, who became terrified and tried to escape, but the humanoid grabbed the wolf and killed it instantly, throwing it violently against a rocky stone. And then its head just broke apart, almost like an egg. And then little Paddy came running towards me, she told me, into my arms, and the hairy humanoid just looked at me with these gentle brown eyes, threw the wolf over its shoulders like a sack of potatoes, and retreated into the woods. I truly believed he helped me. Yes, he got himself a good meal as well out of it, but he definitely saved Paddy's life, and I think he deliberately intervened on my behalf. I was to discover that over the years there were people in Alberta who had seen sightings of creatures like this. Some accounts were positive, and some people had experienced terrifying encounters with the mythical creature, so not everyone had a happy tale to tell. It was only in the year 2009, I was married by then with a beautiful wife and 2 lovely children living in Alberta, and one day we were all watching a program about Bigfoots, and that was when I was able to put the name to the hairy humanoid that I had seen between the ages of 14 and 15 when I was living with Sophia in her cabin on that remote and wild large area of land in Alberta. I now knew the creature I had seen was a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch, or a Yeti. Sadly, my beautiful friend, mother, guardian angel, Sophia, whom I loved with every fragment of my being, died in 2003, and she is so sorely missed. She quite literally changed my life all those long years ago, and saved me from 2 parents who potentially could have seriously damaged me emotionally if I had stayed with them for very much longer. I always admired that courageous, plucky little 14-year-old boy that had the confidence to run away. I would like to tell all your listeners that some people who are missing do so intentionally, because believe me, that not everything that goes on behind closed doors is as straightforward as you may think it is. I know that better than most. As for my parents, I do not know what became of them, and as callous and as cold as it may sound, I don't really care either, although I do forgive them for the way they treated me all those years ago, because I don't want to hold any bitterness in my heart. So that is my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, the year was 1941. Growing up in those days, I wasn't a brave boy. My younger sister Lola was much more courageous and wise than I was. It was her suggestion that we should run away from home to look for our grandmother Rosa, on my mother's side of the family, who only lived a couple of hours' drive away from us. We had her address. We knew if we found her, that our lives would be so much better. We could move in with her and never have to live a moment longer under the same roof with our wicked stepmother. In the early years of my life, my birth mother had read stories to us about wicked stepmothers before, but until then, I had always falsely assumed that such fictional, unsavoury characters were fictitious fairy tales, but now I knew differently. I discerned that stepmothers could be as treacherously conniving and vindictive as the malevolent characters portrayed so eloquently in storybooks. I knew this, as a stepmother had indeed made a fortuitous, unwelcome appearance in our lives, and after her serendipitous arrival, nothing was ever the same again. She was like a festering disease in our home, that became more and more malignant, like an aggressive, unbridled cancer that could not be tamed or suppressed. We lived in North Carolina, in a rather quirky little white wooden farmhouse, on a small plot of land. My real mother had become ill after being diagnosed with serious depression. She was being treated at a mental facility at the time, where they were giving her electric shock treatments for her depression, which, looking back, I believe did her more harm than good. My father had been given legal custody of us, as my mother was deemed as unfit to take care of us at the time. It had saddened our young little hearts to see my mother so broken up, so fragile, so delicate, so vulnerable. My little sister described my mother like Humpty Dumpty. "You can't put the pieces together again," she explained to me. "Mummy is broken, like Humpty Dumpty, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Maybe the doctors won't be able to fix Mummy either." Our mother had been the apple of our eyes growing up, but we were witness to her gradual emotional decline, which soon became physical, as her health began to wane. I remember she became thin, refusing to eat. She was always crying, and it became a laborious challenge to get her out of bed every morning. She would tell us to leave her alone. She just wanted to curl up and die. It all began after my mother gave birth to a stillborn child. It was losing that baby that had driven my mother to the edge of her despair. She had carried that baby to full term, but when it was born dead, my mother was so devastated after her baby's death that she never fully recovered from her grievous loss. My parents buried their baby boy in a cemetery, giving him the name Christopher. In the end, my father could not cope with my mother's vacillating mood swings and the all-consuming desolation that had hijacked her life, robbing her personality of its former effervescence.
She was grieving the loss of her baby so much that she almost forgot about the rest of her family. The subdued, crestfallen woman my mother had become was a sorrowful shadow of what she had once been. We had always known her to be fun-loving and colourful, but not any more. I'd often hear my father arguing with my mother, telling her to snap out of it, get a grip, that life wasn't a bed of roses, and that things happened in life, and she should get over it. For God's sake, Hilda, people die, children die, it happens. I'm sorry we lost our child, but you are not the only person who's lost a child in the world, you know, nor will you be the last. You need to pull yourself together, woman. Get on with your life. I'm sick of you mooching around the place, feeling so dreadfully sorry for yourself. Other people have it far worse than you, but they manage to rise above the storm. You need to pull your socks up, sweetheart. You rarely do. I'm trying to pick up the pieces of my life, Robert. I really am, my mother had cried out indignantly. But I feel completely desolate, as if a black cloud has swallowed me whole.
Stop being so dramatic, Hilda. As I keep telling you, you need to pull yourself out of this lugubrious melancholia. It doesn't become you. You have 2 children that need you now. I need you. How about trying to focus on the living, rather than mourning the dead? It's the living that need you. Little Christopher is in God's hands now, and is being well taken care of.
I remember one day 2 men in white coats came to pick my mother up. They spoke to my father earnestly. I could see them from the kitchen window, nodding heads. My mother was screaming, fighting back, as they ruthlessly dragged her to their truck. And then they were gone. She was gone. I cried sorrowful tears when I saw my mother leaving the house. The men in white doctor's coats had been rough with her, showing her no mercy or compassion. They were treating her as if she was completely insane, or even a danger to herself. We asked my father who the horrible men in white coats were that had taken our mother away from us. He exclaimed to us that our mother was suffering from a very serious disease called depression that needed special treatment. "What is depression?" I'd asked my dad.
Depression is when you're very sad all the time, and it's so crippling that you can't live a normal life. Your mother has gone to a mental health facility to get ongoing treatment for her condition.
In the days that followed, my mother's mother, our grandmother Rosa, would come to visit us regularly, and she and my father would have these heated rows about my mother. My grandmother was furious that my father had sent my mother to this mental facility, believing that my father had overreacted, sending my mother to a place like that, for in those days they viewed even depression as a mental illness. "Thanks to you, Robert, the medical professionals I spoke to think my daughter is loopy and as mad as a March hare, and you know she's not. When is she ever going to get out of that medical facility? The place is like a dreadful prison. There are bars on the windows and doors. The other day when I visited her, they tied her down with leather straps to a gurney. They were giving her sedative injections. That is not normal. My daughter's not receiving the correct treatment. She's depressed, for God's sake. She's not a raging lunatic. The treatment she's receiving is barbaric. These men in white coats should be locked up for what they're doing to my daughter. And, Robert, I hold you responsible for sending her to this macabre place." My father had fought back indignantly.
"It's the only place for her, Rosa. My wife is seriously sick. She needs help, professional help. These people know what they're doing."
"Do they really?" said my grandmother, raising a cynical brow. "I think they're making my daughter's condition 1,000 times worse. That place is more likely to kill her than to save her."
"If you're not on board with the choices I make for my wife, Rosa, then I'd kindly like you to leave right now."
My father had told my grandmother she was no longer welcome in our lives, and that had been that. "But what about my grandchildren?" Grandmother Rosa had protested. "I have a right to see them, you know."
"Get out!"
my father had screamed. Me and my sister Lola missed Grandma Rosa more than words could ever say, and we also longed to see our mother again. When we broached the subject with our father, he was non-committal and vague, saying my mother was in the best place for her current condition, and it wasn't advisable to see her at such a critical stage of her treatment, as it would only worsen her well-being if she were to see us. I couldn't comprehend my father's irrational, nonsensical reasoning. If my mother was sad, would it not make her happy to see us again? Wouldn't seeing us give her the motivation to get better, so she could leave that desolate place and finally return back home? Weeks later, me and my sister were both horrified to learn that my father had divorced my mother, and in no time at all he remarried a woman called Wilhelmina, that we secretly called the witch. From the moment she arrived on the scene of our lives, it was like a tsunami had hit our home, as the happy, easy-going lives we had once known became completely derailed. I couldn't comprehend why my father would marry such a dreadful woman, whom had no redeeming qualities whatsoever, but my father didn't see it. He spoilt Wilhelmina in a way he had never spoilt my mother, and bought her everything she could possibly ever want. She lapped it all up like a pampered pooch. I'd never met a woman so in love with her own image. She would tirelessly remove the mirror from her purse and study her reflection all day. Indeed, I was surprised that her smug, self-satisfied face hadn't actually cracked the mirror. "It's like Dad is seeing her as a beautiful princess, isn't he?" my sister had pointed out to me, "when in reality she's an ugly, ugly, ugly toad. Dad is blind to how grotesque and vile she is. Even her words are like poison. I can't stand her. She's evil. Mum was beautiful on the inside and out, but this woman, she's gross." I knew my sister was absolutely right. She may have only been 10 years old, but she had a wise head on her shoulders, and was sharp, astute, and discerning like an owl, along with being a very good judge of character. "You're a boy," she asked me suddenly. "Do you think that Wilhelmina is pretty?" "I'm 11 years old. I'm not going to find anyone old pretty, am I? Especially not someone married to Dad. Wilhelmina is old. She's in her 30s. She's ancient. Old people are never pretty," I told her. "Yes, but if you were 30, do you think you'd find her attractive then?" I frowned. My sister could ask some strange, impertinent questions that I'd never given any consideration before. "I'm not sure. I suppose she's better looking than some people her age, but she's a horrible person, so if she's pretty or not, it doesn't count, does it?" "I mean, sourballs look very nice, don't they? But they taste bitter." "You've got a good point there," said my sister reflectively. "But remember, some people like sourballs, so maybe that's why Daddy likes Wilhelmina." I could remember the first time Dad introduced us to his new wife. He looked as proud as Punch, as if he'd won the lottery. It was like he thought Wilhelmina was such an asset, as if in some way having her on his arm had elevated him from owning a Ford to a Lamborghini. He had never been that proud with my mother on his arm, and seeing him like this made me nauseously sick and very protective towards my mother. I saw Wilhelmina as an unwanted intruder in our lives. I remember my dad was grinning from ear to ear, like a very foolish Cheshire cat who had got all the cream. Too bad he didn't realise how sour the cream was. If he had truly tasted it, I'm in no doubt he'd have thrown up. When he introduced us to Wilhelmina, he said, "This is your new mother," half expecting us to jump up and down for joy. "She's not my mummy," I said. My sister had stamped her foot and reiterated my statement. "We don't want another mummy. We're happy with the mummy we've got. We don't want another one."
"Now that's not the way to talk to your new mother, Alex," my father told me. "I want you to apologise to Wilhelmina for being so rude."
"She's not my mother," I piped again. "I'm not going to apologise. Why should I apologise when I'm speaking the truth?"
"Give them time, my sweetheart," said my father, wrapping an affectionate arm around Wilhelmina. "They just need to get to know you better. And when they do, I'm in no doubt they will adore you as much as I do." I was to learn my father had known Wilhelmina for 3 weeks. They had dashed over to a registry office to tie the knot. It would seem my father was a fast worker, and as soon as his divorce had been finalised with my mother, he had another woman in his arms. It wasn't a good look, and there was a lot of nasty scandal and gossip going on in our hometown about the affair.
Most people were disgusted with how my father had abandoned my mother and replaced her with someone else. I overheard one woman at the greengrocer saying to her friend, "That, my dear, is Robert Lewisham. Men like him make me sick. It's the reason I never got married myself. I mean, look at him. He looks as if butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. He dumped his own wife, put her in some kind of mental institution because she was grieving the loss of her stillborn child. He then married that Wilhelmina woman. None of the locals like her at all. I'm not sure where she comes from, but she's very stuck up and very opinionated. Thinks she's better than anybody else. Obviously a city girl, if you ask me, who thinks us country folk are an inferior breed. She's a nasty piece of work. It's those children you have to feel sorry for. The man's just replaced his own wife. I can't imagine what those poor kids feel like. Well, this Wilhelmina, she's quite easy on the eyes, isn't she? Robert Lewisham looks like he's locked under her spell. More fool him, said the woman. He's making a complete idiot of himself. He thinks that everybody in town is admiring the woman on his arm, when in reality everybody is mocking him and laughing at him behind his back. When we first met Wilhelmina, she eyed us through her dark, soulless eyes. She was wearing a summer dress covered with a pretty meadow and a tiny pink belt around her narrow waist, which matched her shoes and her purse. I noticed she had very big feet and hands, which contradicted the feminine physique she boasted. Her lips were perfectly painted, a bright scarlet colour, and she had long spider's legs attached to her eyes, which I was to learn later was actually false eyelashes. Whenever my father was not looking, or paying attention, that is, Wilhelmina treated us like the dirt under her shoe, that deserved to be trampled, pushed around, crushed beneath her forceful heavy feet. She was always rudely ordering us around, telling us to do chores around the house, to scrub floors, wash windows, iron clothes, get the fire started in the hearth, peel the potatoes and carrots for dinner. "I told you to wash the dishes," she'd scream at me. "Now do it, or I'll send you to bed without any dinner. Honestly, you're such a disagreeable young man. My bet is you take after your mother in that lunatic asylum. If you don't watch your back, you'll be joining her there too. What do they say? The apple doesn't fall very far from the tree." I wanted to defend my mother. I really did. But Wilhelmina scared me. There was something disabling about her that made my blood run cold. "Yes, ma'am," I would say dutifully, scurrying to the sink to wash the dishes, wondering why the woman barely lifted a finger herself. She was desperately lazy and got us to do most of the stuff around the house, always taking credit for the chores herself, claiming to my father that she'd worked hard all day, cleaning windows and polishing furniture, when in reality she had made us do the whole damn lot after we returned from school. "If you tell your father you did the cleaning, I'll fry your hamster in the deep fat fryer," she'd warned me. I didn't doubt her for a moment. She was cold and callous. It was like she was the queen bee, and we were her workers. She always was telling our father that we had misbehaved, even when it wasn't true, and always looked incredibly self-satisfied when our father would send us both off to bed. Suffice to say, with Wilhelmina now in our lives, our loving relationship with our father deteriorated immeasurably, as she did her damnedest to turn him against us by telling him we were the most disagreeable, unlovable, spiteful brats that she'd ever had the pleasure to meet. "What is wrong with you kids?" she would snap at us. "Why are you always misbehaving?" There was no point telling our father that Wilhelmina was horrible to us. He wouldn't buy it. He saw the woman through rose-coloured spectacles, and in his eyes she could do no wrong. One day she was angry with me for not cleaning the downstairs toilet. "I'm not going to clean it," I had protested. "You do it. It was your sister that got sick in there. It stinks. There's vomit all over the floor. She's your sister. You do it." Wilhelmina had invited her sister and her husband over for dinner the previous night. Her sister had got violently sick, hurling up the contents of her meal in the downstairs toilet, and the splatter of her vomit had barely made it to the toilet bowl, and had crusted itself over everything. Wilhelmina had bullied me enough, so I was determined to stand my ground. More fool me. There was no way I was going to clean that mess up. I remember she'd fried us hot chips for lunch. Then she brought my plate over to the downstairs toilet and threw the chips on the floor, rubbing them into the filth with her shoes. "There's your lunch, Alex. And if you don't eat those chips now in front of me, I'm going to put Snuggles, your hamster, into the deep fat fryer." The woman forced me to eat the sodden chips covered in urine and sick in front of her, or my hamster was dead. I knew she would do it, so I ate those disgusting chips and threw up violently afterwards. Soon me and my sister began to loathe Wilhelmina. Sometimes she would sprinkle so much salt over my food that it was inedible, and my father would shriek at me for not eating my dinner. I would see Wilhelmina smirking. She rarely looked so satisfied and thrilled when my father became angry and belligerent with us. Of course I tried to tell him that Wilhelmina was an awful woman, but he never listened. It was like telling him the earth was flat or the sky was green. He had these preconceived ideas about the woman, and he couldn't agree with anything we said. I could understand why he believed her to be like sugar and spice, as that is how she behaved towards him. "Oh, Robert, you must put your feet up. You poor thing. You've had such a hard day at the office. How about I get you a nice cold beer and some warm, lovely toasted peanuts? Oh, your shoulders are so tight. You're knotted up. Let me give you a nice massage, Robert. Oh, I bought you a really stunning sweater today. I thought you'd like it." She'd fuss over him like a celebrity. My father loved every minute of the attention she devoted on him. We would watch him become so beguiled by this woman, but he didn't know that, like the moon, she had a dark, insidious side that was far from attractive, and that this woman did not wear her heart on her sleeve. It was the day when she came close to deep-frying my hamster that I decided enough was enough. Wilhelmina was irate with us for not picking apples from the orchard. She wanted to make an apple pie for my dad, and I will say this for her, she wasn't half a bad cook. We had become distracted and began to play hide-and-seek out of doors together. She came barging out of the house, wearing a disenchanted expression, an ugly scowl on her face. She wanted to see how we were getting along with picking the apples from the trees because she thought we were taking far too long. "Why haven't you picked any apples yet?" she shrieked, her dark eyes blazing like red fiery coals. She looked like the devil's spawn. "I asked you to pick them half an hour ago. What is wrong with you children? You never bloody listen. You're as loopy and disobedient as that kooky mother of yours in the mental asylum." "Sorry, ma'am," I said. "We'll pick the apples for you now, I promise." I could see that Wilhelmina was furious. Her face was burning a bright red colour, and her unbridled body language was aggressive, as she oscillated her arms above her head indignantly, to express her level of exasperation. "I've had enough of you children. You pick those bloody apples for me now, you hear me? I want them in 10 minutes flat, and no later, do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," we both said. She grabbed me by the collar and glared at me, her eyes meeting mine. Her nostrils flared, and the furrows between her brows developed into deep crevices. "What did you say, Alex?" I was trembling in my boots as she glared at me, because the woman had killer eyes that spurted a vile poison. "I said yes, ma'am. We'll pick the apples for you right now, and we'll deliver them to you in the kitchen in about 10 minutes. No later, I promise." "How many times have I told you, Alex, to call me mother?" "But you're not my mother," I protested indignantly. "I am your new mother now, Alex." "Right, that's it," she said, storming off. "Where are you going?" my sister asked me. She looked frightened. "We better pick the apples. Wilhelmina is going to kill us if we don't. We've only got 10 minutes. I had a deep-down prognostic hunch that Wilhelmina had another plan on her mind, and to my horror I saw her dashing downstairs with my little hamster in her hands. The oil was bubbling on the hob, and Wilhelmina was leaning over the hob with little Snuggles in her hand, ready to pop my chubby little hamster into the hot oil. I could not believe it. I didn't hesitate to run over to her. I pushed her over so she landed on the kitchen floor, wincing in pain. She'd sprained her ankle. I didn't care. "Look what you've done, you dreadful brat!"
she cried out. "How dare you! I've sprained my ankle. I'll get you for this," she growled. "How dare you push me over like this?"
I immediately retrieved my very frightened hamster and quickly put her in her cage, hiding her somewhere where I knew Wilhelmina would never find her. I got into awful trouble that evening when my father came home, as Wilhelmina told him that I'd pushed her over deliberately. She failed to mention, of course, that she was about to deep-fry my hamster.
"Dad, you don't understand. Wilhelmina was going to—" "I don't understand, son. What do you take me for? I understand very much. You're growing into an objectionable young boy. It's unacceptable behaviour for a man to lay a finger on a woman. Least of all, push her over. You're going to bed without any supper tonight. But before you go, I want you to apologise to Wilhelmina for your insolent behaviour. Do you understand, young man?"
"Yes, Dad, I understand." Wilhelmina smirked as she watched me having to apologise for pushing her over.
"I'm sorry, Wilhelmina. I'm sorry for pushing you over."
"Correction, Alex. You've said it all wrong. You're supposed to say you're sorry, Mother, for pushing me over," she corrected me.
"I'm sorry, Mother, for pushing you over."
"Good boy. All is forgiven, Alex. I don't think it'll be necessary, Robert, to send the young boy to bed without food. That would be cruel in the circumstances."
"But he pushed you over, sweetheart," said my father. "You sprained your ankle."
Wilhelmina let out an exaggerated sigh. "I've forgiven little Alex here, haven't I, dear?"
"You're far too kind for your own good, sweetheart," my father had interceded. "Very well, Alex, you can have dinner with us tonight. But next time you pull a stunt like that, young man, you'll be sent up to bed without any dinner. Do you understand what I'm saying?"
"Yes, Dad," I said, hanging my head bashfully.
"Dad, you don't understand what's really going on here,"
said my sister Lola, intervening.
"If you would allow me to explain, none of this is Alex's fault. Wilhelmina is responsible." "Watch yourself, young lady," said my father. "You're not going to cast any judgment on my wife. Do you understand?"
"Yes, Daddy."
"Good girl. Now let's enjoy our meal in peace, shall we? It looks a fine spread we have here. What is it, Wilhelmina?"
"It's beef stew and dumplings with mashed potato and corn bread."
"Looks perfectly lovely, Wilhelmina. Doesn't it, kids?"
"Yes, it's lovely, Wilhelmina," we both said. At the next opportunity I got, when we visited the local town, I quickly hurried off to the pet shop, and I slipped little Snuggles under my sweater, popping her in a cage with the other hamsters. I privately cried as I said goodbye to my little pet, but I could not afford to risk Wilhelmina getting hold of her again. I told Wilhelmina that my hamster was dead.
"Oh, thank goodness for that," she said without remorse. "They're like Vernon, aren't they? I can't for the life of me understand why anyone would want a hamster as a pet. Quite nonsensical, if you ask me. Cats are much more civilized." "Especially if they're black," I said, thinking a black cat would go very well with a witch, including a broomstick, of course. Wilhelmina didn't get it. "Actually, I do rather like black cats," she admitted. "I hate her," I told my sister when we were upstairs in our bedroom together. "I really hate her," I said, my eyes brimming with tears. "Have you seen how she has Dad wrapped around her little finger? He's so fooled by her." "I think we should run away," my sister told me. "I can't live under this roof with that obnoxious woman a moment longer. We need to get away from here." My sister was bright as a button. The teachers at her school described her as having wisdom beyond her years. "She's like a very old head on young shoulders, Mr. Lewisham," my father had been frequently told. "I'm astounded by some of the things she's come up with in class. I have to remind myself that your daughter is only 10. "She must take after me," my father had told the teacher. "I was always very bright at school."
I knew the teachers weren't talking about my sister in regards to her academic prowess. Granted, she was good at school, but the teachers were actually referring to her emotional intelligence, and as bright as my father was, he lacked that shrewd reasoning. If indeed he had been more insightful and discriminating, he'd have seen what was really going on under his own roof, and how desperately unhappy we were living under Wilhelmina's implacable heavy hand. If my father had been prudently pragmatic and commonsensical, my birth mother, for example, would have received professional counselling rather than being sent off to some kind of mental asylum to receive treatment. "Did you hear me, Alex?" said my sister, giving me a firm, urgent nudge. "We can't go on living here. Wilhelmina is a witch. We need to get out of here. We'll go to Grandma Rosa's farmhouse. She'll be so pleased to see us. We can live with her there." "I'm not sure," I said hesitantly. "I'm scared to run away." "Don't be ridiculous, Alex," my sister had said. "Do you want to be a doormat all your life and allow that witch to bully us like this? We deserve better, so much better than this." I will admit, I had been too afraid to take that leap of faith. Even if our home lives were miserable, we had food in our bellies and a roof over our head, and we also had each other. In my opinion, we should just grab what we could get and live with the consequences. But my sister was not prepared to live with the status quo. "You're not happy? I'm not happy, Alex. We need to find Grandmother Rosa. We need to go and live with her. Remember Wilhelmina tried to deep fat fry your hamster? She's seriously sick in the head. Now listen, I've got Grandmother's address. We don't live too far away from her. It's possibly a couple of hours by car, which means a lot longer by foot, but we can walk there. It won't be too hard. I have a rough idea where she lives. I always used to watch the journey Mum took when she drove to Grandma Rosa's house." I was not feeling sanguine or optimistic about abandoning our current lives, however messed up they might be. I was not like my sister. She had guts, spunk, and steely grit. "What about school?" I asked her. "When we find Grandma Rosa, she'll place us in a brand new school. I know you're going to miss our school and our current friends, but that just can't be helped. Anything is better than living with that witch." In the end, I was encouraged and compelled that me and my sister should indeed run away from home. Lola could be very persuasive if needs must, and leaving behind a toxic, pernicious household seemed like a great idea. Me and my sister gathered a bag together. We packed some cookies, water bottles and sandwiches for the journey that we would soon undertake. We had decided when it became dark, we would slip out of the house when my father and Wilhelmina were fast asleep. It must have been about 3 o'clock in the morning when my sister finally woke me up. I remember it was dark outside. When I glanced out of the window, I felt rather intimidated by how black and inauspicious everything appeared. It seemed uninviting, and my bed infinitely cozier. I did feel reluctant to leave. My sister was younger than me, but she displayed no reticence about bracing the gloomy darkness to find our grandmother. "Are you ready?" "I'm ready," I said. "Are you sure you want to do this, sis?" I asked. She frowned at me. "You're not losing your nerve, Alex, are you?" "Of course not," I said. "I just want to make sure you still want to go to Grandma Rosa's. Do you think I'd have woken you up if I changed my mind? Now let's go, but be quiet about it. We don't want to wake up the house." I had slept in my jeans and sweatshirt overnight, so I didn't have to get changed at the last minute when I got up. I crept cautiously down the staircase, following my sister. We were both wearing only our socks and carrying our sneakers in our hands. Our staircase used to creak in protest when you walked down it, so wearing squeaky sneakers may have woken up my father. I knew if he saw we were running away, he'd do his nut. My sister had the bag in her hands, with our scant provisions, and we had a couple of my father's torches. My sister left a note for my father, telling him we were going to live with Grandma Rosa, and not to come looking for us. "Sorry, Dad, we had to leave. We're not happy living with you and Wilhelmina. We want to live with Grandma Rosa. Love, Lola and Alex." Me and my sister clandestinely pulled back the sliding door in the living room. It made an annoying scratching sound, which was terribly loud to us. We closed it quietly behind us, tiptoeing onto the porch. Once we were safely outside, we put on our sneakers, tying them in knots to ensure they didn't come undone. My fingers were trembling nervously. I was even more aware of how dark it was outside. The moon was ungenerous, with only a faint sliver of moonlight shining down upon us, and a scattering of silvery stars, and even they didn't seem as bright as I remembered. I wasn't used to venturing out at this time, and it was a strange experience. But the reassuring sounds of the crickets and frogs seemed to calm my somewhat ruffled nerves. I was bewildered at how my heart began to pound so violently in my chest so that I could hear every single vibrating beat. I couldn't believe we were actually doing this, and I wasn't exactly sure how I felt about our decision. But we were here now. There was no going back. There was no changing our minds. When me and my sister trekked over the meadow towards the woodgrove, the idea was we were going to take a quick shortcut through the woodgrove to the road on the other side, and then cross through the next wooded area and the next until we reached the main road. This way we could shorten our journey significantly, so we thought. We ambled through the dew-laden grassy meadow towards the tenebrous silhouettes of the towering trees, a mix of red maples, sweet gums, tulips and pine trees. I knew this woodgrove very well during the day, but at night it had morphed into a whole different, rather inauspicious place that smelt of moss, pine and earth. A light wind whistled through the trees. It had become bodefully menacing. The trees began to jiggle, and the wind changed, stepping up a notch or two, moaning like a grumbling old man having a bad day. It made me feel ever so slightly nervous, but I kept my focus on the torchlight and the path ahead. It wasn't easy walking in the woods at night, with the jagged rocks angrily jutting out of the ground, and leaves, bracken and underbrush littering our path. We had been walking for ages, but when the first signs of winking morning light began filtering through the trees, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Everything was soon washed in an ethereal golden light, and a welcoming pretty glow. The crickets and frogs were now muted, to be replaced by the happy trills of the bird song. We walked the entire day through the trees, but we couldn't find a road, and we began to realize that we might actually be lost. That was when we found an old run-down farmhouse in the middle of the woods, which was the weirdest thing we'd ever seen, as there were no driveways from the woodgrove that would lead out to any road. The farmhouse was completely surrounded by trees in every corner. It was built of stone, and looked like it was ancient rather than modern. Me and my sister peered through the windows to see if there was any sign of life, but the place was completely empty. There wasn't a soul in sight. We opened the door and walked around the farmhouse, and the only way I can describe it as representative of another time, for there were no modern influences in this house. The ancient kitchen boasted pestle and mortars, butter churners, and ancient wood-burning stoves, and everything was as clean as a new pin. But there wasn't a soul in sight, but we knew someone must live there. If we hung around, maybe they would return to help us find our way out of this maze. I remember once getting lost in a cornfield, but this was 1,000 times worse. I felt as if we were walking through the trees forever, going around and around in circles. Our hearts were now heavy. We knew we were lost, but my sister insisted if we continued walking straight ahead, we would finally meet up with another road. But alas, that never happened. Our hearts grew heavier and heavier. We were hungry and thirsty, and we'd finished all our supplies, and that was when we saw her. I remember being bewildered to see this woman. She was not wearing any clothes, but was covered in long, dark, flowing hair. She was as big as a giant, but in truth I was so glad to see her. We hadn't seen a single soul for ages, apart from a scattering of deer that bolted from us the moment they saw us. We saw the occasional squirrel, rabbit, hare and chipmunk. This hairy lady was so human-looking that I didn't doubt she was human, but she had exceptionally long arms. She was strong, lofty, powerful and majestic. At such a young age we were much more accepting of this idiosyncratic woman than we would have been if we had been 5 or 6 years older. I don't think even for a fleeting second we felt intimidated by her. In truth, we should have been, given her gargantuan size. My sister hurried up to her and pulled out the photograph of Grandma Rosa's house from her jean pockets to show the hairy lady. The hairy lady snatched the photograph from my sister with her very big hands and studied it closely. She became animated to see the picture and started making a chuckling sound at the back of her throat and pointing to the house and to herself again and again. I could tell by the expression on her face that she knew the house well. "You know it?" my sister asked her, sounding delighted. The hairy lady, we discovered, couldn't speak a word of English, so she spoke to us in a rather strange language that seemed to be automatically translated in our heads. And even though this was happening, we didn't find this odd at all. "I know this place. I know this place," she kept saying to us in our heads. "Hipata pipo, apata pipo." My sister was flooded with relief. "Can you take us there, please?" The hairy lady nodded. She led us away in a completely different direction than we had been going. We had been heading north. She was leading us in an easterly direction. I could see she was frustrated with how slow we were in moving forwards. She scratched her head and spoke again in her strange language to us. "Hipatani, homati pasa." "You're too slow," she said. "I need to carry you." "We don't mind," we told her. We were glad to be lifted off our feet, as our bodies ached with tiredness. We were exhausted and very thirsty. Our energy was flagging. The hairy lady threw us on her back, me on her right shoulder, and my sister on her left. We held on to her tightly, as she glided efficiently through the woodgrove. She seemed to gallop like a horse, and moved with such a grace. There was none of this jolting or jerking up and down movements that you might expect. It was like she was floating. I could hear her breathing, and I noticed she smelt strongly of pine, dirt, and moss. It was not an unpleasant smell. She smelt exactly like the forest. At one point, she stopped at an obstreperous stream, where the water thundered and crashed ebulliently over the sculptural rocks. Me and my sister drank the crisp, refreshing, cool water very gratefully, and the kind hairy lady led us to a berry bush, and we stuffed ourselves silly with berries until our hunger was satisfied. She then threw us over her shoulders and carried us on her back for many ages. It was as if we were as light as a feather to her. Me and my sister were so comfortable that we both fell into a peaceful sleep. Finally, she lowered us on the ground. I couldn't believe it when I opened my eyes to see we were actually standing outside Grandma Rosa's house. I've never felt so happy, so relieved in my entire life. It must have been early evening. We could see the farmhouse was prettily dappled in a soft moonlight. Me and my sister impulsively hugged the kind hairy lady. She returned the favour, but hugged us very gently. We thanked her for delivering us safely to the farmhouse, but we noticed she never left until she was sure we were safely received by Grandma Rosa, who was thrilled to see us. "Your father was here, and so were the police. Everybody's been looking for you." We told my grandmother all about Wilhelmina, and my grandmother told my father everything she'd learnt about our treacherous stepmother. When she told my father that Wilhelmina had tried to deep-fry my hamster, that really rattled him. He seemed to wake up from his blinded oblivion. The rose-coloured spectacles seemed to fall off his face. I'm glad to say he allowed us to stay with Grandma Rosa until he divorced Wilhelmina. But the news got even better. Grandma Rosa persuaded my father to allow my mother to return home. Let's see how she gets on. When my mother did return home, she bounced back to be the mother that we always loved. I think the relief of being away from that mental asylum snapped her out of her depression. She and my father got remarried and were happier than ever. I don't know how she could have forgiven him for getting her committed. Suffice to say that mental asylum was brought to its knees by Dwight Eisenhower and is now an abandoned building that is considered haunted. It was only when I was much older I realized the creature we'd encountered all those years ago was a Bigfoot. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Posy and my Bigfoot encounter happened in 1984 when I was 16 years old at the time. I was born in James's Island in Charleston, South Carolina, and when I was 8 years old, my parents moved into a green leafy neighbourhood called Sandhurst in the North Bridge area that is associated with the Ashley River and is well renowned for its much-loved fishing pier. Sandhurst is conveniently located and easily accessible to so many conveniences like shopping and restaurants, but the area itself boasts a high standard of living for growing families, which is why I still live here today, in close proximity to my mother's house, where I grew up as a young girl. I grew up in a refurbished 50s-style home that was built on a hilly incline and painted in a soft pastel green shade. It possessed a deep slung grey roof, French wooden windows, and about 20 steep stone steps that led up to a glamorous, stylish wooden front door. The front of the house possessed an extended flat roof that was supported by columns that covered a large porch that overlooked the pretty views of our neighbourhood. I grew up with my brother Daniel, who was 13, and my sister Alicia, who was 10, and I had what I can only describe as an idyllic childhood that was spent largely outdoors, engaging in all kinds of outside pursuits, as in those days we did not have the technological advances of the younger generation today. I never felt we missed out, though, but maybe we didn't know any better. My parents would entertain outdoors frequently, and the parties were very commonplace in our home, with barbecues, dancing, swimming, and lots of exuberant chatter. In those days we would cycle up and down our road, walk our cocker spaniel Freya in the woods, and play all kinds of games from hopscotch to jump the rope, tag, hide and seek, and invariably swim during the summer months in a pool where we would play Marco Polo, which was our favourite water game. During the summer holidays, my parents would invariably take us on camping excursions or hiking, and we'd often visit coastal destinations like Hawaii or the Oregon coast for our quintessential beach holidays. My story begins when one day my siblings and I went to stay at my grandmother's Virginian country farm for 3 weeks, as both my parents were going on an overseas holiday to Europe, which involved travelling to France, Germany, Italy, Austria, Switzerland and England. My mother had never been to Europe before, so she was exceedingly excited about the prospect of such an exciting adventure. We felt pretty disillusioned as kids not to be accompanying them on this marvellous vacation of a lifetime. My grandparents used to be cattle ranchers on the farm, but they were now retired and still living in their original colonial-style farmhouse, although they were letting out their fields to a local cattle rancher in the area for grazing purposes, as he was growing his business and needed more grazing fields. My grandmother was about 80 years old, and her husband was 100, and both of them seemed to be in remarkably good health, despite their advancing years. My grandfather's charming rustic farmhouse was very old and was in pristine condition, and it was built on an expansive area of meticulous manicured green turf. The extensive area consisted of white-poled fencing for the pastures and ubiquitous trees, a couple of pretty barns, white gravel roads, and vast open prairie land dotted with grazing cows, also areas of dense woodland that was teeming with indigenous wildlife like white-tailed deer, squirrels, chipmunks, raccoons, rabbits, and the list goes on. In the far distance you would observe the masterful triangular mountain ranges rising up into the vast blue firmament like imposing pieces of sculpture. The house itself was a symmetrical farmhouse with whitewashed walls, large windows and a green roof, with a very colonial-looking front porch with columns and steps that led up to the front door. It overlooked the most ravishing panoramic and mesmerising views onto the wide pond and the wooded area that lay beyond. When we moved into this farmhouse, it was exciting being with our grandparents again, and we were having an incredibly good time, as they were always so eager to spoil us. I was soon to learn how deeply depressed my grandfather had become. He really wanted to die, and he made no secret of this fact, and this came as a horrifying revelation to me, one that was impossible for me to fathom. I did notice that he seemed rather downcast and fed up with the world, and he looked like a man that had lost that spring in his step that I remembered so well in his earlier days. I was absolutely amazed that he was being so brutally honest with me about the way he felt, because to look at he was in remarkably good health. He was lucid and sharp and had no arthritis or health issues like high blood pressure or diabetes, so for a 16-year-old girl it seemed inconceivable and incongruous that he wanted to leave the earth plane for good. I had no comprehension why anyone could feel this way, and it was a huge enigma to me. At that age, the idea of someone wanting to die seemed ludicrous and preposterous, but I'm glad to say I'm much more understanding now that I'm older, of course, and infinitely wiser, I hope. It was, of course, a very uncomfortable topic, the topic of death, and still is, that most of us would rather not discuss at all. "Janine," he exclaimed, "I've had enough. I'm 100 years old. I don't expect you to understand, but I'm tired of it all. I've had about as much as I can take. I want to go." "But why?" I protested. "You're not even ill. You're not even in pain. It's nonsensical to me." "Of course it is to you, Janine," he said. "You're young with your whole life ahead of you. You have a springy, youthful body that makes your life flow smoothly for you, without any bumps on the road."
It's like the difference between a young and an old car. The young car runs smoothly and effortlessly, easily, but the old car sometimes fails to start, if at all. I am that old, battered and tired car that's not sparkling on all my cylinders, so to speak, and I'm due for the scrap heap any time soon. You mean your body feels all worn out? I asked. Exactement, Janine. My body is not what it used to be when I was racing around the farm in my former younger days with all my cows. Now that was living my life to the fullest. I loved spending my days on the farm, riding horses and talking to the cows. It was an attractive life. It was wonderful. I can't do those things anymore. So I'm just existing, living without joy. Now that's not a life. I really want to die, it's as simple as that. It's all about quality of life, Janine. And sitting around all day, doing nothing, is not my idea of living at all. My life is a shadow of what it used to be in my former days, when my body was strong and able.
I think I do understand, but even so, Grandpa, you have to wait for your time to die.
Not necessarily, said my grandfather. There are ways you can hasten the process.
But why on earth would you do that? I asked.
Believe me, he's tried, Janine, said my grandmother, interceding. I caught him trying to hang himself once, and I was having none of that, and I put a stop to it immediately. I told him that was the most selfish thing he could have done, with me finding him dangling in the closet. Could you imagine anything more terrible or horrifying? What on earth would I say to your mother? She'd never forgive you, Grandpa, if you did that to her. Never, ever. She'd hate you if you did that, I told him. That's what I told him, said my grandmother. Your grandfather's been inquiring about euthanasia with doctors all over the place, but even if assisted suicide were indeed legal, I doubt anybody would give him a lethal cocktail. With him being in such good health, I mean. It would be unethical to do so, as you can imagine. He even had the audacity, Janine, to ask the vet to help him out when we went to take our cat Safi for her annual injections. You should have seen the vet's face. The poor man, he went as white as a sheet and looked like he wanted to pass out from shock. You do it for the animals. Why not for me? I'm like an old dog that needs putting out of my misery. And you have my word that this procedure you perform for me will never leave these walls. No one will ever know. Of course, the vet refused, as you can imagine. The poor man, he was mortified, I think, that your grandfather had had the audacity to ask him for help. He told your grandfather that he wouldn't even euthanize an old dog that was in such good health, as he felt it was morally reprehensible to do so. As you can imagine, I could hardly believe what I was hearing. How could your grandfather be talking like this? Wasn't it unethical and morally wrong to want to take your own life? Did not the Holy Book affirm the wrongfulness of this course of mortal action? Was it not really self-centred of him to leave behind my gran, and let alone us grandchildren as well as my mother, who adored her father? Janine, said my grandmother, I didn't want to tell you about all your grandfather's issues. Goodness knows, you're here to enjoy yourself and have a great holiday on the farm, and I don't want to sabotage your lovely holiday here. But I needed you to know about this because you're staying here and your grandfather could potentially attempt to take his own life. He is just so desperate to die. I cannot do anything to stop him. Believe me, I've tried. I've never seen him more determined about anything in my life before, so I would not put anything past him. I even had to hide the rat poison and antifreeze in a cupboard because I didn't trust him. When your grandfather found the lethal poisons hidden in the cupboard in the barn, he laughed at me and thought it all terribly funny. He told me that he may have a death wish, but dying with poison was not an option for him, as it would be too painful, too slow, and a very agonising death. He doesn't want to die in pain, you see. Of course he doesn't, I agreed. He wants to die quickly and efficiently. How do you feel about him, Gran, leaving you on your own like this? If he does die, of course, I mean. I don't feel good about it at all, said my grandmother, wiping away a tear. But your grandfather's insistent about it. He wants to go, and I have to support his wishes. He's 20 years older than me, you see. I'll not help him die with a pillow over his head, of course, because I could never do that to him, never. But he hasn't asked you, I asked in horror, has he? Of course not, Janine, laughed my grandmother. He wouldn't be that mean to me. He's not that self-centred. Impulsive and hot-headed, yes, but selfish, no. No, he's not selfish. Gran, what I don't understand is why Grandpa can't read books, watch television, play card games, chess, go for scenic drives. You don't have to be active to have a full, rich and extraordinary life. You see people all the time who are paralysed, and they manage to have a good life. Why can't he? I agree with you, Janine, wholeheartedly, actually. I'm long in the tooth myself, and yes, my body's not what it used to be, but I find life very rich, rewarding and blissful, and seeing you kids is the highlight of my life. It's my greatest joy. But your grandfather, he's a very active, or at least he was a very active person all his life, and he sees things incredibly different from you and I. He has a whole different perspective on it all. We have to understand that. You would think that my holiday would have been marred by my grandfather's desire to die looming over my head like a dark thundercloud. It would seem being young, whimsical and remarkably naive had stupendous benefits, and as a young mind, I seemed to have a bountiful resilience that was worthy of note. I did not allow such defeatist negative thoughts to ruin my holiday or parade around my mind with its sombre, bleak, bitter and pessimistic outlook. Instead, I helped my grandmother bake cakes and cookies and prepare jams and chutneys for the store cupboard. My young siblings and I would hang out in the woods, playing all kinds of games under the shade of the towering trees. We would also swim in the pool and eat large slices of watermelon. We would visit the cows and ride my grandfather's horses around, washing and brushing their brown coats until they gleamed. We enjoyed feeding them and mucking out their stables. I really got the distinct impression that my grandfather enjoyed having us around, and he played all kinds of games with us. I soon began to forget about the insidious desire he had to end his own life. It all just seemed like a bad dream to me, and for a while I truly imagined it to be just that. Perhaps it is what I wanted to believe at the time. One day as we were sitting eating breakfast on the wooden deck that overlooked the most panoramic mountainous views that were silhouetted like silvery blue hazy shadows against the azure blue sky. The pond that was situated only about 10 yards from the porch literally sparkled in the morning sun, and its gleaming mirror reflected the overhanging trees with boughs that almost hung down into the water. I noticed on a few water lilies with their wide-open pink flowers sat a very large green and black frog that was basking in the sun, snapping up a fly with its long tongue. There were also dragonflies circling the water and several white butterflies floating past us like pretty white petals suspended in the air. I remember for a moment time stood still as I drank in this nectar-rich sweetness of the idyllic, sumptuous haven that I was observing. Suddenly I saw a huge, towering silhouette of a dark creature gliding towards the pond. In an instant the frog dived into the water and swam away, sensing that a predator was in his midst, and he wasn't prepared to take any chances. I watched in utter amazement as this strange, hairy, humanoid creature paddled into the water and began to swim, keeping her head above the surface as a tiny pink baby, flecked with a few wispy dark hairs that reminded me of a monkey, sat perched on her shoulders and seemed to be enjoying this watery ride. I was astonished, and my eyes grew as wide as saucers, and my mouth was hanging to the ground in amazement. I could not imagine what I was seeing, and I was totally gobsmacked. The critter was easily 8 foot tall, 700 pounds and 3 foot wide, and I was almost certain my estimates were correct. All I know is that this thing was colossal, with a cone-shaped head, overlong arms, powerful shoulders, and a long, oval, hairless, deep-tanned face. She was covered with long, flowing, golden-brown hair, which was beautiful and sleek with a gleaming shine to it that looked like it was regularly brushed. I was to find out later that my grandmother had shown this creature how to brush her hair, by manner of practical demonstration, of course, from a distance, and had actually thrown her a hairbrush once, along with a horse comb. Since then, the critter just loved brushing her own hair. Every 6 months my grandmother would buy her another hairbrush, or whenever the critter's hairbrush broke, which was a regular event. I gather the critter would leave the broken hairbrush on the step, and my grandmother would replace it with a brand new one only a day or so later. "What is that?" I asked my grandmother as I observed the critter. "Oh, that's Matilda, the wild woman who lives in the woods." "What is she?" I asked in amazement. "I told you," insisted my grandmother. "She's a wild woman covered with hair. If humans went around naked like that, they would also grow hair. It's no different, dear." "But she is different, Granny," I said. "I mean, her head is cone-shaped, and she's very colossal and has overlong arms. She's a giant. She can't be human." "That's because she's built for the wild, dear. She's a formidable hunter, and a fine mother at that, even if I say so myself." "Do you see her often?" I asked curiously. "Oh, all the time," said my grandmother, "as we all watch her swimming regularly. It would seem that although conscious of our presence, she didn't appear overly concerned about us watching her swim, and seemed comfortable." "Do you talk to her at all?" I asked my grandmother. "Of course not, dear," chuckled my grandmother. "She doesn't speak our language. The critter, though, acknowledges me and nods, but she's a very quiet, shy, wild woman who keeps herself to herself most of the time. I know there is a male in the woods there too, but he never shows himself to us. He's much quieter than she is." "But she could kill you if she wanted to," I said. "I mean, she looks dangerous and very, very scary." "Well, dear, she wouldn't do that to us because we respect her boundaries, you see. But if we were to attack that child of hers, she'd kill us in an instant without a doubt. I'm certain of that. She's incredibly protective over her young." I noticed that a light seemed to come on in my grandfather's elderly pale blue eyes, like a beacon in a lighthouse illuminating a thought in his mind. Suddenly I heard him say to us, "Bye, I love you all." Then my grandfather raced off the patio and dived into the pond and swam towards the hairy female and started wrestling her for the baby on her shoulders. I watched in horror as the female just used only one arm to hold my grandfather down without any trouble while balancing her youngling on her shoulders, and then with a forceful thrust she continued to hold him down under the water. I did watch him wiggling for a while, and then things became horribly, terrifyingly still, and the female critter allowed my grandfather's lifeless body to finally float to the surface, and even with the baby on her shoulders, she lifted my grandfather's lifeless form out of the pond with her powerfully strong arms, and carried him over to the porch as if he weighed nothing, where both my grandmother and I were sitting. I noticed her brown eyes seemed almost apologetic and empathetic towards us. She placed my grandfather's body in front of my grandmother, and then returned to the pond to complete her swim, almost as if nothing had transpired. But I did notice she looked up at us a couple of times with a somewhat perturbed, bewildered look on her face, as if she couldn't really make sense of what had happened. "Well, at least he didn't suffer," said my grandmother. "It was a quick death, and I hear drowning is not the most unpleasant way to go." "He planned this," I said angrily. "He planned this. It was deliberate." "No, dear," said my grandmother. "It was a spontaneous last-minute decision on his part. I think he suddenly realised that the creature could end his life quickly. At least we know he didn't suffer at all, and he's at peace now. Matilda helped us out by ending his life for him. It was a very good way to go, dear." We watched as the hairy critter climbed out of the water, shaking her shaggy coat like a long-haired golden retriever, with a little pink tiny critter still perched on her shoulders and hanging on to her long hair tightly, all the while regarding us with its golden eyes. Finally she nodded and then glided away while she moved her overlong arms backwards and forwards and manoeuvred her powerful legs with 5-foot strides as she bounded towards the woods. Her movements were so fluid she could have been floating. That was how smooth her movements were. I was just so relieved that my 2 younger siblings, who'd been playing marbles under the table, had not seen a single thing, and I was relieved about that. "Granny," I said, "do you think Matilda knew that Grandad wanted to die? Do you think she was helping out?" "I have no idea," said my grandmother, "but that's the kindest death I've ever seen. I think I'd prefer to go that way than swallow a bunch of pills." Fast forward several weeks, and my parents returned from an amazing holiday, and then we had my grandfather's funeral, but my mother always believed that he'd just drowned in the pond, and we never ever told her the truth, because we didn't want her to suffer more emotional grief. Years later, if I was to find out that Matilda was a Bigfoot, and so there you are. That's my story.
Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and I hope you're enjoying a lovely weekend. And don't forget to go and get yourself an effervescent sparkling drink or something very warm and comforting, because I've got a lovely story for you tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's continue with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. I was driving my father's beat-up mustard-coloured Mustang down this long, dusty road in the middle of nowhere. When I glanced around at the scenery, I didn't recognise where I was. But everywhere I looked, there were a plethora of trees and undulating grassy meadows sprinkled with pretty alpine flowers. The day left a vague impression on me that was faint, indistinct, unreliable. I think it was summer. The sky was a pretty cornflower blue, and at first the weather seemed rather unremarkable. By all accounts, it was a fine, rather pleasant day, just the way I like it, not too hot nor too cold, the kind of weather where you can keep on your long-sleeved sweater and feel perfectly comfortable all day. Mrs. Thornton, our well-meaning next-door neighbour, was always looking out for us after my mother had died, as almost like a kind of stand-in matriarch figure in my life. She told me that my father's old Mustang was only good enough for the knacker's yard, which was why my father had purchased a brand-new Dodge Journey to replace our old friend, having decided it was time to part ways with the vehicle that had served our family so well. I had always liked that mustard-coloured Mustang. It was easy to grow attached to a vehicle where memories were indelibly imprinted within its aluminium carcass, like oils on a canvas that created a picture that can't easily be washed away, unless someone cruelly paints over it and is desirous to expunge the precious treasured memories, like shredding up a photograph into pieces with little regard. The Mustang for me represented the happy memories of my childhood, my mother sitting in the passenger side seat, my father at the wheel, and me in the back, with my inquisitive little black Scotty Inkaboo, who loved riding around in that car almost as much as I did, possibly more. I could see my mother seated on the passenger side seat, wearing her red velvet beret, and her dark glasses shading her eyes, while a lonely dark curl would slide across her forehead, which she would quickly brush away. She would smile at me. Her lips were always painted in a deep ruby colour, and her skin was always as white as a lily. She would say, "So where shall we go?" as if the world was our oyster, and the choices to where we could travel were endless. That Mustang, much like any other useful car a family might own, had opened up a world of postcard destinations for us that we were privy to visiting together as a family. Now there she was sitting in the driveway, gathering dust, forsaken and forgotten. So I took pity on the battered old car, not just out of the goodness of my heart, I hasten to say, but as a broke student, I had started to use her quite regularly. My father warned me that she wasn't going to last very long, unless good money was finally spent on her to get her back into peak condition, and he didn't believe she was worth the expense.
"It's better, son, to save up your money to buy a new truck, but you can use the old girl for as long as you like, until finally she packs up and gives up the ghost."
Let's just say the Mustang had an illustrious, colourful history behind it. Many near misses, scrapes, and way too many bumps and bangs to mention. My father was not exactly the most punctilious driver. My mother used to hate him driving, as he'd drive through a red light when there was no traffic around, but my mother believed that no risk, no matter how small, was ever worth taking. One year we went on holiday to the coast, where the beach was bespeckled with bluebottles, and if you were careful, you could make sure you avoided them. But my mother believed the risk of getting stung far outweighed the privilege of swimming in that water, so beach visits were hijacked by the bluebottles indefinitely. To say my mother was not a risk-taker was an understatement. Her motto in life was always to tread carefully. The Mustang had a personality of its own, and always protested grievously when it was taken out for a spin, like an old dog with tired hips that doesn't fancy going out for a walk. It rattled precariously on its wheels, and juddered and shook wherever it went. But for me, its utilitarian usefulness of getting from A to B was absolutely invaluable. even if your insides were knocked and jerked around during the journey, especially when you were travelling down some unforgiving, hostile, dirt-covered roads strewn with potholes, craters, depressions and pebbles. Suffice to say, at this point of my journey, I don't know where I am, as I take this adventurous drive in the middle of nowhere, but I don't get a sense I'm lost. My journey seems purposeful, deliberate, although I'm not sure exactly where I'm going. As usual, the road is very bumpy. No surprises there. In a trice, the weather begins to change, as quickly as the scene on a movie set. I thought it was day a moment ago, but I realise it's now early evening, as when I glance out of the window, my sweeping eyes meet the trees on either side of the road. I notice everything has become ambiguously vague and enigmatically obscure. The sky a gunmetal grey. The world has become like a hazy, indefinite black and white photograph. I see a haunting white mist, steadily rolling towards me. It seems to be sweeping magnanimously over the entire road, so I can't see my way ahead. I drive ever cautiously through this mist. I see the silhouette of a man wearing a bowler hat, moving through the mist. I peer through the window of the windscreen to see the figure more clearly. It's weaving its way towards me, through the white vaporous haze, getting closer and closer to me. It looks like something airily pretentious that you might actually see on a horror movie, when you're opening up to that dreadful scene when the monster emerges through the white clouds that have gathered across the road and then audaciously thunders towards the young man in the Mustang, which of course has to be me. And then you see him, eyes as red as burning coals, and a mouth of sharp, jagged teeth. And then, as you would expect, in this pre-ordered scene of events, he lunges towards me and thrashes open my driver's side window so that the glass shatters all over the road into tiny shards. Then my blood and guts are spilled over the windscreen. This is not what happens, I'm relieved to tell you. The silhouette makes its gainful approach. I realise it's no monster created by Steven Spielberg in one of his fictional movies. Instead, the indeterminate figure resonates with me, with a comfortable familiarity that immediately enables the gathering of tension between my shoulder blades to release their tightness like a loosened elastic band, and the churning knots of trepidation in my guts to become much more relaxed. I recognise the long, lanky shape of the legs and the black suit the man is wearing, fitting the contours of his body to perfection. I know unequivocally that this is my father. I would notice his awkward body shape anywhere, as he has always had suits specially made for him by the tailor in town. He has very long legs, and any of the shelf-bought suits you can buy would only end up with the legs midway up the lower calf. I feel a relief wash over me as my father opens the passenger side door and then sits down next to me.
"Thank you, son," he says as he sits down on the seat. "You certainly took your time picking me up. I thought you'd never get here."
"It's terribly misty," I explained. "I can't see out of the windows with all that mist."
"What are you talking about, son? There is no mist."
I peer through the windscreen. I'm surprised that my father is right. There is no mist. The evening is clear, the moonlight as bright as a street light. I then realise there's something different about my father. There's a nasty smell connected to him that smells of earth, dust, decaying flesh. Not the smell that I would normally acquaint with him. I'm almost scared to look at him, but I do. I notice his eyes are like marbles, bulging out of his sockets like loose buttons that are held together by the finest of thread. His face is white, white as a ghost, and his body cracks as he sits down, as if all his crumbling bones have actually broken. They rattle around, much like the Mustang. In that moment of horrifying sober revelation, I realise my father is dead. I don't want him to know that I know he's dead, but it's difficult to keep up the pretence. "Where are we going?" I ask him.
"We're going to find your mother, so we can all be together. It's a while since we've seen your mother."
"But Dad, Mum's dead," I say. "We can't go and visit her unless we go to the graveyard." It's at this point I wake up with a start. There are beads of perspiration pouring down my face. and I notice that my sheets are saturated by my own sweat. I realise I'd been dreaming, but it felt so incredibly real, the dream so lucidly vivid. Suddenly my cell phone pings on my nightstand. It sings out its annoying musical trill, which I'm determined to change but have not got around to it. I reach out to grab my phone. I gasp when I see Mrs. Thornton's name on the caller ID. What on earth is that woman, our next-door neighbour, doing phoning me? I've never known her to call me before. Then it dawns on me that something quite dreadful must have happened to my father. Please God, no, are the thoughts that thunder audaciously through my head, like clamorous church bells. I answer my cell in the student apartment I share with 3 other university juniors at the University of Maine. Believe me, I did not want to answer that cell. It became like the monster in the mist I'd seen earlier in my dream. "Hello, Mrs. Thornton," I say, unable to disguise the high level of angst in my voice that makes me sound more like a girl. "Is that you, Simon?" she asks me. Who else did she think it was, I wondered. "Yes, it's me, Mrs. Thornton, Simon. Is everything all right, Mrs. Thornton? Is Dad all right?" I ask. My heart is thundering so loudly in my chest. I can hear every single vibrating beat. I'm so frightened she's going to tell me that my father is dead. I mean, he appeared to me in my dream deceased. Was this some kind of ominous prognostication? Is this what they call a premonition? I can feel my hands are trembling as I reach out to my nightstand to steady myself, like an old man who has stability issues and might just crumble without something or someone to lean on. I've never been so terrified to hear someone's words before. For a fleeting moment I want to hold back the hands of time, or stop the sands in the hourglass from slipping through. I almost want to put a large coal in Mrs. Thornton's mouth, to stop her from talking, almost like a plug in the sink that prevents the water from draining out. I don't want to hear a word of what she has to say. I'm so afraid of what her words might convey. But it's too late. They spill out freely, like the rice from a glass jar. I draw in a deep breath, to brace for impact of her horrifying words that I don't desire to hear, but they don't pack as hard a punch as I was expecting. "Nothing to worry about, son," comes Mrs. Thornton's long-drawn-out drawl. "Your father, he had a stroke this afternoon when we were playing bridge together. He was admitted to the hospital an hour ago." "Is he dead?" were the only words that came out of my mouth. I mean, I was sure he was dead. In my dream he had appeared to me as a walking, talking corpse. I was sure that this was a sign. I'd often heard people say to me, I had an ominous feeling that she was dead, and then 5 minutes later the phone rang and my worst fears were confirmed. Was this about to happen to me? A nauseating shiver ran down my spine. "Please, dear God, don't let Dad be dead." "Oh, heavens no, Simon. Your father is not dead. He had a stroke. He's doing very well. Fine at the hospital. As fine can be." I was wondering if Mrs. Thornton was telling me the whole truth. Maybe my father was worse than she was making out. People could so easily sugarcoat things. I hate it when they do that. I'd like to know the absolute truth every time. That way you have to put it in your pipe and smoke it, whatever it may be. You don't have a choice to the matter. "Your father wanted you to know he's doing just fine. He doesn't want you to visit him until the weekend. You've got lots of studying to do, he tells me. He doesn't want to interfere with your work. He sends you lots and lots of love and tells you not to worry. He's doing absolutely fine." "Are you kidding me, Mrs. Thornton? Dad's had a stroke. I can't just act like nothing's happened and get on with my studies. I have to be with Dad at a time like this. He needs me. I'm coming right now." I glanced briefly at the time. I had enjoyed an afternoon kip about half an hour ago, when I'd received that lucid dream. But it was now 6 o'clock. There was no time to lose. I needed to get to my father as quickly as possible. But the journey was easily 4 hours away, and that was if I was lucky, without suffering the inevitable hold-ups that can so easily swallow up time. There was a pause on the end of the line,
Are you going to be driving that beat-up Mustang of your father's? I'm not happy with you driving that on the road, Simon. With the greatest of respect, I'm not sure that the thing is actually roadworthy. It's an accident waiting to happen, if you ask me. I would come and pick you up myself, but my truck is in at the dealer's for servicing at the moment. But I could pick you up tomorrow if that's a help. It's kind of you to offer, Mrs. Thornton, I say, but accepting your lift tomorrow is too long a wait for me. I need to see my father as soon as I possibly can. My Mustang has finally broken down, so I shan't be driving it. But I am going to hitchhike to the hospital. It's no big deal. Only 4 hours away. Hitchhike? Says Mrs. Thornton, as if it's an alien word she's never heard before. Now, I don't think that's a good idea. I've got to go, Mrs. Thornton, I say, stopping her flow in mid-sentence. I didn't want to hear the well-meaning woman garrulously prattle on about the dangers of hitchhiking. I was in no doubt that in her repertoire she had a plethora of stories of the horrible things that had happened to people when they hitchhiked, as that woman stored up horror stories like you might collect shells at the beach. I really did not need to listen to her yabbering on and on. She could be like one of those noisy alarm clocks that you could never switch off once she got started. Of course I knew her intentions were good, but it didn't surprise me in the least she'd actually been a schoolteacher in her younger days. She was so good at telling people what to do. It never occurred to her that she always came across as quite pushy and very opinionated. I could almost visualize her now, sitting on the end of the telephone, shaking her short white curls defiantly, her nose twitching furiously. Why won't that boy listen to me? She was probably thinking. It would be far safer if I picked him up in the morning. But no, that boy is determined, come hell or high water, to visit his dad, even if he rides with the devil himself. Some people will never ever see sense. I will admit Mrs. Thornton had been great to me after my mother had died, devotedly bringing us over some delicious home-cooked casseroles, cornbread and large bottles of her homemade lemonade to enjoy. Yet despite everything, it didn't give her the right to dictate the choices I would make for my own life path. And if I wanted to see my dad right now, wild horses weren't going to keep me away. I'll be in touch, Mrs. Thornton, I say, switching off my cell, so she couldn't call me back, as I knew she would do just that. Mrs. Thornton could be very persuasive when she wanted to be. I could see her making me agree to wait for her in the morning, but that wasn't going to happen. I needed to go to the hospital now. My father was the most important person in my young life, the only real family member I had left after Mum had died. He had always been there for me in life. Now it was my turn to be there for him. I gathered a satchel of essentials for my journey. I put in a quick change of clothes, a torch, my wallet, a packet of beef jerky, a couple of small bottles of Mountain Dew. The whole apartment was swathed with the darkness of early evening. None of the students I shared the apartment with had returned home yet. My bet was they were out on the town, quenching their thirst at a local bar. The kitchen looked like a bomb had hit it. That's the problem with sharing with other men. None of us cared a jot about the condition of the place. Things were much better when Rachel Greenbrier had been living in the apartment with us. She'd kept the place like a sparkling new pin, picking up after us, washing dishes, fastidiously polishing the furniture, and shining up the windows. In the end, possibly out of sheer frustration from living with 3 pigs, she had moved into another apartment. I guess she got sick of cleaning up after us. I can't say I blame her for that. I left a note on the refrigerator, out of courtesy for my flatmates. Dad's had a stroke. Gone to see him. Not sure when I'll be back. We'll be in touch when have more details. Simon. Before long I was ambling down the long asphalt road. I wasn't going to stick out my thumb until I came to a spot where the cars would lightly pass me and offer me a lift. I found trying to hitch a ride in the local town was near impossible, so I didn't even try that approach. When I got to the main road, I stuck my thumb out. Several cars briskly passed me, but someone pulled over to the side of the road, and I climbed into their truck. Thanks, I say, pulling the safety belt over my shoulder. The truck smelt of cigarettes and pee. I found myself wondering whether the old man had a dog that had been peeing around the truck. I hope to God the old man hasn't got a bladder problem, I thought,
and it wasn't him that was doing all this peeing. I would have liked to have opened the windows to obliterate the offensive acrid smell, but I didn't want to cause offence. The old man is looking at me with a withered look, a look that I think he wears on his face every single day, almost as if going through life is a challenge for him. There's a melancholia that hangs around him, as pungently as the smell in his truck.
"My name is Duncan Parkinson," he tells me. "And who may you be, young man?" "I'm Simon," I said. "Very, very nice to meet you, young man. So where are you going, then?" "I'm going to the hospital. It's 4 hours from here, but I would be very grateful for a lift to the nearest town if you're going that way." "I can do better than that. I can take you halfway. Why are you going to the hospital, if you don't mind my asking?" "My dad. He's had a stroke."
Duncan Parkinson looks at me through his piercing blue eyes that were shadowed by a deep sadness. He was very empathetic towards my plight, more so than one would expect from a perfect stranger.
"I'm sorry to hear that, son. That's very bad news indeed. Is he going to be all right?"
He asks me, rubbing his moustache with one of his hands. He had become stoically reflective, as if telling him about my dad had somehow touched a raw nerve for him.
"I believe so, but I'm not sure. I'll only know the truth when I get there. My neighbour, Mrs. Thornton, phoned to tell me that my dad's been admitted to the hospital, but I'm not sure if she's sugarcoating his condition to subdue my concern. She's one of those people that will tell you things are going to be all right, even if they aren't. I remember as a boy I took my sickly canary to her. It was a bright yellow colour. I'd heard she was good with birds. She used to own a parrot. She told me she was going to take care of it for me, that it was going to be absolutely fine. But when she returned my canary to me, it wasn't the same bird. She said to me, 'I told you he would get better.' I guess it died on her, so she surreptitiously replaced it. The irony is she didn't know I already knew it wasn't the same bird." "I know exactly what you mean, son," said the old man ruefully. "To be fair to your neighbour, she was trying to make things better for you by buying you a brand new canary. Personally, I find the nurses at hospitals never ever tell you the truth. When my wife died of a stroke a few years ago, they phoned me to tell me to get to hospital at once, as my wife wasn't well. But when I got there, she was already dead, as cold as ice she was. I knew when they'd phoned me she'd already been dead for quite a long period of time. It made my blood boil, it did. I wondered how long my wife had lain there, dead, before anyone bothered to even notice her condition. If she had just died, her body would still have been warm. They are good at keeping you in the dark in those hospitals, they are. I've been told she was going to be fine, just fine, but she certainly was not. I rue the day I listened to them. I could have been by her side the whole time, when she breathed her last, but I had no idea that she was leaving for good. Not a bloody clue. As like you say, everybody sugar-coated everything. 'Mr. Parkinson,' the doctor said to me, 'your wife is going to do just fine. I've seen this kind of stroke many times before. Most of my patients make a full recovery.' That's what the so-called on-the-ball doctor told me." I could hear the bitter resentment in Mr. Parkinson's voice, and his story made me feel all the more certain that dropping everything for my dad at the last minute was a very wise decision indeed. "I'm very sorry your wife died, Mr. Parkinson. That's terrible. And I'm even sorrier that they made you believe she was going to make a full recovery. That's really bad." "Me too. I suppose, to give them their due, none of them are God. They weren't to know the outcome. I miss her something really bad. My life's never been the same without my Peggy. She was the lighthouse of my life, guiding the way. Now I'm like an old battered ship crashing against the rocks in tumultuous conditions, always losing my way without her. It's like I've lost the very best part of myself, you know. I wish to God it had been the other way round, I really do, and that I had gone first. She would be much better at navigating this life without me than I am without her. My wife was a survivor. Me? Well, I barely get through each day. I think you're being hard on yourself. You look like you're doing well to me, Mr. Parkinson. Kind of you to say so, son. Kind of you to say. But believe me, I've looked better. I used to walk for 3 hours a day, you know. I was as fit as a fiddle. But after Peggy's death, I sank into a deep depression. I became like a sagging mattress that has lost all its bounce. But let me stop prattling on about me. I'm worried about your father's stroke, son. I really am. I do hope he will make a full recovery. Many do, you know. My wife was one of the unlucky ones. But then she never did herself any favours. Smoked like a chimney, she did. She was very overweight. She had all the red flags that warn you about high blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes. The doctors told her to give up smoking and to lose weight. But easier said than done. My wife just couldn't do it. He turns to me briefly. Your father, is he a smoker, son? A tad overweight, perhaps? He asks me, raising a brow, expecting me to confirm his bold assumptions. No, my dad's very slender. I've never considered him to be unhealthy. He's thin and gangly, very long legs. If the truth be told, not exactly the kind of candidate you would expect to get a stroke. That doesn't mean a thing, son. You can be slender and unhealthy on the inside. It's called being internally fat. Did he have high blood pressure? Did he smoke? Those are questions you need to ask yourself. He smoked cigars, but that doesn't count, does it? I mean, they're not the same as cigarettes. Oh, but they are. There you are, then. He smoked. Not good. Cigars are as bad as cigarettes. Could be worse, even. I'm a fine one to point a finger, I am. Look at me. I smoke like a chimney. You can probably smell it. I'm sure my truck doesn't smell too good. You can open a window if you like. I'm afraid my dog does tend to pee in the truck as well. I hope you can't smell that. She would be in the truck tonight with me, but I left her at the house today. She seems to think she needs to mark everything with her pee. I took her to the greengrocer's recently to pick up some vegetables for the stew I was cooking. She walked up to the greengrocer, lifting her leg up on him, peeing over his trousers, in the calf area, of course. Never been so embarrassed in all my life. But that greengrocer's a good man. He didn't even bat an eyelid. He said to me, "It's official. Your dog really likes me, Mr. Parkinson." I opened the window to allow some fresh air into the truck, gulping the fresh air with relief. That bad, son. I do apologise profusely. I get used to the smell, I'm afraid. I'm quite sure my house stinks as bad as this. My Peggy, if she was alive, she would have house-trained that dog of mine. Good and proper, she would have. I was sad to say goodbye to Mr. Parkinson when he dropped me off halfway to my destination. He was reluctant to see me go, and even had in mind to take me the whole way to the hospital because of my father's stroke. I refused him kindly, and was ever grateful to be out in the fresh air again, away from the unfortunate stench of his truck. I think that dog of his has anointed every part of his truck with his pee, as it had reeked to high heaven of ammonia, only slightly overshadowed by the cigarette smoke. I wasn't sure what was worse, the cigarette smoke or the pee. They were both quite caustic to the back of my throat. I'd never hitched a lift at this time of the night before, but I knew I needed to get on to the well-travelled road before I stuck out my thumb again. I was suddenly feeling exhausted and drained as I walked down the pavement. That was when I noticed a graveyard on one side of the road, and under the dancing shadows of an ethereal moon, it seemed quite beguiling, almost as if it was calling me. I suddenly had a brilliant idea. What harm would it do for me to rest in the graveyard for just 20 minutes before I proceeded on my way again and stuck my thumb out for another lift? My father had always taught me growing up that one of the greatest secrets to success was regular kips. I found that they had always served me well. From a young age I'd learnt to take a kip here and a kip there, sometimes in the most unlikely of places, but it had never bothered me. I'd once slept in a friend's bathtub with blankets and a pillow, and it was one of the best cat naps I'd ever had in my life.
These short sleeps had helped me to study better for exams and get great results. I had learnt to listen to my body. My father told me that the Iron Lady, Margaret Thatcher, who'd been the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom for a long period of time, claimed it was her catnaps that would take her through the day, helped her mind to remain sharply focused. It was the quintessential secret to some of the sharpest minds of our day, my father had told me. Right now my languid body was telling me it was jaded, fatigued, very drained. I surrendered to its dogged demands. I never argued with my body. I wasn't worried about taking a kip in a graveyard just for 20 minutes. I know a lot of people might find that strange, but it really didn't bother me. A 20-minute delay was not going to kill me, one way or the other. I was not a superstitious person. I didn't believe in ghosts and ghoulies or strange things that go bump in the night. And growing up, I'd never ever been afraid of the dark. On the contrary, I enjoyed the darkness. It reminded me of a cool, soothing room, where the curtains are drawn, a tranquil sanctuary that invited sleep and relaxation, a private, harmonious place to be alone with your thoughts. I thought the graveyard was a peaceful, secluded place, where I could happily lay down my head on the grass, along with the deceased souls of the dead, that rested in this placid cemetery. I would be in good company, I thought. I'd always found cemeteries interesting, somnolent places, and enjoyed visiting my mother's grave with my father after her death. It was always a tranquil experience. In truth, I never sensed my mother's presence in that graveyard, but I never told my father that. It might have upset him. He would regularly visit my mother's grave, to feel close to her, every Tuesday, without fail. That's when he'd deliver a fresh bunch of flowers to her gravesite, as regular as clockwork. I knew that on this coming Tuesday, my mother's gravestone would unlikely to be blessed with some fresh flowers, unless my father was released from hospital, but I thought that that would be exceedingly unlikely. Still, miracles happen, and I was certainly banking on one. The graveyard was closed, as the wrought iron gates were held together tightly with a thick iron chain and padlock, but it would be easy to climb over that wall. The quaint, charming stone wall fringing the edges of this private cemetery was the kind of wall you might see in the Highlands in Scotland, or a quirky English country village. I had seen enchanting walls like this when I went to stay with my father's mother in Scotland for the summer holidays when I was 12 years old, and this stone wall brought back wistful, nostalgic memories for me. I had navigated my way over many of them in Scotland, and I could do so now. The moonlight serenely rested on the roof of the sky, like a solitary rounded light, and its silvery prisms danced over the stone walls and dappled the rounded gravestones of the cemetery in a gossamer illumination that gave the graveyard a spectral, phantasmic appearance. But that did not concern me. I climbed over the wall, throwing my satchel onto the ground below, with a loud walloping thump, and with the light of my torch I cruised across the graveyard, which was well maintained with a manicured lawn, neat flower beds, and perfectly preserved granite tombstones. But the ones in the furthest corner of the cemetery were gnarled, decayed, tarnished, old, covered with moss and lichen. They were so weathered and so bronzed that the names of the souls had long since departed, been washed away by the hands of time. With my flashlight I navigated my way through the cemetery, wondering where I would lay down my head. The weather was perfect. It was a warm night, with only a hint of a breeze that nudged my cheeks very gently. I could smell the freshly mown grass as I meandered towards a gravestone that was nestled under the protective awning of a cherry blossom tree. I sat down on the ground, opening a bottle of Mountain Dew, and thirstily knocked back the whole bottle without drawing breath. I couldn't believe how thirsty I was. I curiously read the inscription on the stone. I decided this was the spot where I would enjoy my catnap. I read the name on the gravestone, Sidney Holloway, 1930 to 2001, and the note on the granite slab read, "Reader, beware. As you pass by, as you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so you will be. Therefore prepare to follow me." Wow, I thought, reading the inscription on the stone. The message made my blood run cold. I didn't fancy the idea of ending up under the ground any time soon. I was 25 years old at the time, with my whole life ahead of me. Death was a subject I really did not want to entertain or envisage for myself, more than was necessary. I curled up on the grass beside the gravestone, using my knapsack as my pillow. I was exceedingly comfortable. Before long I drifted off into a delicious sleep. I had the alarm bell connection onto my cell phone, so that I wouldn't override my 20-minute nap, as I would be awoken to its loud buzzing sound. Then I would be back on the road again, flagging down another truck. I'm not normally a lucid dreamer. On the contrary, I'm one of those unfortunate people that usually has no memory of my dreams whatsoever. But for the second time, in only a matter of hours, I seemed to be experiencing another comprehensible dream that felt astoundingly real. I would later be forced to doubt whether it was a dream or not, but for a fleeting second, I felt as if something had thumped me so violently hard on the head, as if I'd been beaten by a baseball bat. What the hell? I thought. My whole head began to throb, and my dream seemed to become even more real. The next thing I knew, I was standing on the side of the pavement, holding my thumb out to catch a ride, but the cars whizzed past me, sparing me no regard. It was a pleasantly warm night, with a full moon showering the evening with a magnanimous illumination, which meant I could see my way down the concrete flagstones of the pavement that framed either side of the long ribbon of asphalt. Beyond the pavement there were guardrails that hemmed in the embankment, where the undulating hillocks of grass finally branched out into smoother territory, where a sprawling woodgrove stood. It boasted a vast army of tall, shadowy silhouettes, trees that stood ambiguously erect and proud, with a military deportment. They had shed their verdant regalia over the twilight hours, having hungrily soaked up the tenebrous colours of the night, so their bowels were swathed in black coats. I waved down a truck. It was a silver Ford Explorer that stopped to pick me up. I gathered my things and climbed gratefully into the truck. The moment I sat down on the seat, it smelt really bad. The smell was like death and decay, that impertinently hijacked my senses so badly. I really wanted to gag, but I maintained a stiff upper lip to avoid being rude and offensive. The man sitting next to me gave me a gormless, half-witted, toothless grin. His face was so white, his skin as fragile as paper. His vacuous dead eyes were like marbles, set in deep sunken hollows in the back of his skull. He looked like a living corpse.
"Howdy, son," he said to me. "Good to meet you. What's your name?"
"Simon," I said. The man offered me his white, arthritic, gnarled hand to shake that looked more like a crab's claw, but I pretended not to see it, so he drew it away almost at once when he realised I wasn't going to take it.
"The name is Sidney Holloway," he said in a deep, raspy voice. "It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Simon."
I nearly gasped when he told me his name. Oh my God, that was the name on the gravestone. Was I sitting next to a dead man? Was a dead man giving me a lift? I wanted to get out of his truck right now. I was absolutely terrified. I was sure I was doomed. How was it possible to be driving with a dead man? My heart thundered violently in my chest, and I was afraid to look at Sidney Holloway too closely. This was different to the dream I had earlier on in the evening, when I found myself sitting next to my dead father. This was 1,000 times worse. There were no redeeming factors to this experience. I was worried that this man's deadness could actually rub off on me, like an infectious disease that I might just catch. Was I dead already, I wondered? That might explain why I was taking a drive with a dead man. But as I looked down at my own body, I was very much alive. But when I quickly glanced at Sidney Holloway, I could see he was definitely dead. There was nothing natural about the state or condition of his body, and there were distinctive blue patches on his skin that gave me the impression he was decomposing. No wonder it smelt so bad in this truck.
"So I'm taking you to the hospital to see your father after that dreadful stroke of his," he said. "I'm afraid your father died half an hour ago. More's the pity," he said, giving me a big toothless grin. "You'll be needing these,"
he said, handing me some pink rosary beads.
I'm sure your father is going to be requiring all the prayers he can get. I certainly did.
I grabbed the beads, holding them as tightly as I can, willing this dreadful experience to go away. Please, God! May this go away! Please, God! I suddenly find my eyes waking up to the shrill sound of my cell phone going off, as the alarm reminds me that my cat nap is now over. Someone is slapping me on the face really hard. I look up to find myself staring into the dark eyes of a tall, lofty creature that looks remarkably human. What the hell, I think? I sit up with a start as the creature, who was on her hands and knees, bending over me, stands up straight. When she does this, I'm in awe of her gargantuan size. She's easily 9 foot tall, 800 pounds, strappingly big, with massive muscles, ponderous shoulders. I notice her pyramid-shaped head folded seamlessly into her shoulders. I knew at once she was a Bigfoot, although she was much more human-looking. I noticed her deep-set, dark, benevolent eyes were twinkling brightly at me, as though she was incredibly pleased to see me. She looked how you would expect a gold miner to look when they've stumbled across a plethora of gold that they hadn't suspected to uncover, and have suddenly struck it quite big by serendipitous chance and profitable good fortune. The creature lets out a loud whistle, and another Bigfoot comes rocketing over the stone wall, scaling it like a galloping horse, as if it's no hindrance at all. She charges over to me, like an excitable bull in a china shop. Her unbridled enthusiasm was so contagious that I find myself grinning up at her, rather stupidly, like an idiot. The Bigfoot's mouth opens so wide, her eyes grow as round as saucers, and both creatures look at me, as if I'm an unusual flower that has spouted through the earth that they have never seen before, and are riveted by. The Bigfoots talk to each other excitedly, in a very strange language, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. I knew they were discussing me at great length. I don't think I've ever been spoken about like this before. Imati la povagana. We thought you were dead, after that man hit you on the back of your head, the Bigfoot says, looking at me earnestly. Now it's my turn to look bemused. I had no memory of anyone whacking me on the head. I do remember feeling a thump, but I thought it was part of my dreams. He porfanikanabo, he sanabo. We saw him hit you with a spade when you lay down to sleep. I was astonished, not only by what the Bigfoots were telling me, but because when they spoke to me, their language was immediately downloaded into English in my head. Not even computers can do that. How they did this, I couldn't comprehend, but I knew it was not my imagination. They spoke to me as clearly as you might speak to me, only in my head. I didn't see any man, I said. Himota savanabo. Hikina kolasana. He sneaked up on you, said the Bigfoot. Himokona bani. He hit you with the back of his trowel. When I saw what he did, I scared him away. He ran from the cemetery screaming. He was terrified of me. I doubt he will be coming back. Humopathi. Himosonabanasi. Aginogona. You were still. We thought you had died. But we didn't see your spirit leave your body. We were confused. We thought you must have gone very fast, been eager to get to heaven. Hofipaf! Imokosana sava! Hisulabosana sila! That doesn't usually happen. When people die, they usually hang around their bodies for a while, to adjust to their spiritual change, as their body is now ethereal, not physical. They come to the realization that they are dead, and only after that they've accepted it. Then they will move on. Humorfobaki, hinosana sono, hisholavagi laga. Some people can hang around their body for days. They don't always want to leave it, you see. Sometimes they never depart, because they're afraid of what awaits them on the other side. Ho fabi salaka, himosana sage. The Bigfoots were talking to me in riddles. Nothing of what they were saying made any sense at all. I reached to the back of my head and examined it closely. Oh my God! I had blood on my fingers. Himboko paki safa. He gave you quite a whack, I'm afraid, said the Bigfoot, examining the back of my head. Ho pota sinafodo. You're going to be fine. It's only a small bump. The Bigfoot runs her warm hands across the back of my head, examines the blood on her fingers. Yes, I think you'll be fine, she says. I've seen worse. Hipotasana, or bogolabi. I stumble very awkwardly to my feet, pulling my haversack over my shoulders. To my horror, I discover I'm holding the pink rosary beads that Sidney Holloway had given me. You've got to be kidding me. My blood runs cold. How could this be possible? Did I really encounter that ghost of the dead man? The name on the headstone? Had I seen him? Had he handed me the rosary beads in the car? Because if it was a dream, where did they come from? Where are you going? Asks the Bigfoot. Hisafa Bushiline. I need to get a lift to the hospital, I tell them. My father is sick. I think he might actually be dead. Hopotitasa, Pokilina. No, he's not, said the female Bigfoot. If your father was dead, his spirit would be here. He'd come to pick you up. But he never came. I can always see a father's energy. Really, I said. Are you sure? Hipota. Very sure. The two female Bigfoots tried to encourage me to rest at the cemetery a little longer, and they would watch over me. But I was determined to be on my way, so they carried me on their back to the main road. Upatilono, imofolabina. Godspeed, they said to me. Good luck. I hope your father gets better. I thanked the Bigfoots who remained hiding behind a tree to ensure that I did get a lift. I couldn't believe how much these idiosyncratic creatures actually cared about me. They seemed to be genuinely thrilled that I was alive, but I was trying to get my head around the very peculiar events of the evening. None of them made any sense at all. The strange dream I'd experienced before Mrs. Thornton had phoned me to tell me that my dad was in hospital after having had a stroke. Then there was the nap that I'd had in the graveyard, where I met a dead man, and I had the rosary beads to prove it. But stranger still, I encountered two Bigfoots, astonished to find me alive, as some psychopathic lunatic had whacked me aggressively over the back of my head with a trowel, for reasons even I cannot fathom or explain, with the full intention of causing me grievous bodily harm, or even killing me. The Bigfoots claimed they'd scared him away from the cemetery. Was he offended that I was lying around Sidney Holloway's grave? Was he connected to the dead man? It was possible, I thought. None of this made any sense to me at all, and somehow I knew in my heart that it never ever would. Sometimes in life peculiar, bizarre things can happen that are beyond our understanding, and this was clearly one of them. "Hello, son," said a man pulling up on the side of the road in his white Honda Civic. I sighed with relief when I got into the truck. I glanced out of the window and saw both Bigfoots nodding at me from behind the trees, and then the black fuzzy blur of their silhouettes just disappeared and vanished from my sight. I was touched by their incredible kindness, but this had been one hell of a night. I was relieved to see that the car smelt like new leather, and that the man sitting next to me looked human, and there was no underlying stench of death or decay about him. He did not stink of cigarettes, nor did he have a peeing dog, which was a relief, although he did have an artificial air freshener hanging from the visor mirror. "I hope you don't mind me asking you, why are you hitchhiking at this time of night? I don't mean to be impertinent or rude. You do realise it's 9 o'clock in the evening. At this late, uncongenial hour, any stranger could pick you up. I hasten to say there's some unsavoury characters out here. I'm not being funny, young man, but I'm very aware of all those 411 cases you hear about. Very disturbing they are. People going missing, never to be seen again, all over North America, vanishing off the face of the earth without a trace. If you were my son, I would be exceedingly bothered about you hitchhiking. It would be easy for you to just disappear when someone untoward picks you up, and no one would have a clue what had become of you." He glances at me briefly. "Now, back in my day, it was pretty normal to hitchhike. I did it a lot myself back in the good old days, but I wouldn't do it any more. If my wife knew I'd picked up a hitchhiker, let's just say she wouldn't be best pleased with me. Some drivers have also met their fortuitous end picking up a hitchhiker. What's the saying? No good deed goes unpunished, I said. That's right, son. That's exactly what I was going to say. So tell me, son, where do you want to go to at this time of night? The hospital. It's 2 hours away from here. But take me as far as you're going, and I'll hitch another lift. The elderly man looks at me with concern on his face. He shakes his full mane of curly grey hair, and his steely grey eyes sweep across my damp hair, congealed with bloody patches.
Are you all right, son? What on earth happened to your head? You're bleeding, I see, although I do think it's clotting nicely.
I looked apologetically at him.
I'm sorry about your seat, sir. Some strange man hit me with a trowel in the back of the graveyard this evening. I never saw them coming, but that's not the reason. I need to go to the hospital, you see. My father had a stroke. I need to make sure he's all right. That's why I'm hitchhiking tonight. My car has packed up, so I couldn't use it. Oh, that is bad news. I'm sorry to hear about your father. In truth, I doubt they'll let you see him, son, at this late hour. But I still think you should go to the hospital to have that head of yours seen to. And don't worry about my seats. It's only blood. I can clean it up. My name is Carl, by the way. Carl Sallow. I am more than happy to take you to the hospital tonight. It'll be my good deed for the week, shall we say? That's very kind of you, sir, I say. I would appreciate that. It's only my pleasure. He pointed to a newspaper curled up on his console. Read it to me, he says. Under the title Graveyard Horror. It sounds not unsimilar to the story you've just conveyed to me. So I read the story. Mrs. Laura Day claims on Wednesday evening, on the anniversary of her brother's fortuitous death, she was unable to get to visit her brother's grave, as she had deadlines to meet. She decided to visit the cemetery late at night. The private cemetery was closed, she admitted, but I climbed over the stone wall with my bouquet of flowers. It was important for me to visit my brother's grave on his anniversary. It was a dark night, but I had a flashlight with me. I was placing the flowers at his graveside when I looked up to see a crazed man with a trowel in his hand, running after me. I'm in no doubt he wanted to hit me with that trowel, but I'm lucky that I'm very athletic. Fortunately, I used to be a gymnast as a young girl, so I bolted out of the cemetery with ease, bounding over the wall. Luckily, the half-crazed man was not so nimble. He fell backwards on the ground during the chase. Mrs. Laura Day informed the police about the strange encounter, saying the deranged man is clearly dangerous, but the police have been unable to locate the whereabouts of this mysterious man. I have no idea why he wanted to hurt me, says Laura Day, but I think he might have been as mad as a March hare. Below the writing was a picture of the man, and a caption that read, "If you think you can identify this man, please call the police." What do you think, young man? It sounds incredibly like your story, does it not? It does. I think I had a lucky escape. I guess the man that went after Laura Day succeeded in bashing me over the head. For some reason I found myself telling the amenable stranger the incongruous things that had happened to me that evening. I also showed him the pink rosary beads. I don't know what to make of your extraordinary story, young man. It's an extraordinary story, but I believe it, and I unequivocally believe that you encountered those two Bigfoot in the cemetery. They do have an extraordinary ability to show up when you need help. You believe in Bigfoot? I asked him incredulously. I thought you were going to think I'd lost leave of my senses, and really believe the knock on my head had made me hallucinate. But I promise you the Bigfoots are real. But as to how I ended up with the rosary beads in my hand, after such a peculiarly vivid dream, I do not know. But what I want to know is why you believe me. Because I've encountered a Bigfoot myself. It seemed this night was just so full of synchronicities. I mean, until tonight, I'd never believed in such a creature as Bigfoot living in North America. And now I was sitting next to a random stranger I hitchhiked a lift from who did. Who could validate my experience by sharing with me one of their own. This was not just a random coincidence. Were the Bigfoots I encountered determined that I knew that my encounter with them had definitely been real, and that the bash that I had sustained to the back of my head had certainly not made me delusional. I had my encounter when I was a little boy. It didn't happen in this part of the world, actually. I was on holiday in Florida, staying with my grandparents. They lived in a swampy area surrounded by muddy marshland, known as the Everglades. We were always told not to go into that land at the back of the property, full of gators, crocodiles, snakes, mosquitoes, all kinds of unmentionables. One day I was playing on the back lawn with my sister Zita, and this monstrous crocodile, and I mean monstrous, came charging towards me from the trees that fringed the Everglades, or the wetlands if you like. I was small at the time, easy pickings for a hungry crocodile. Let's just say, these crocodiles, they can move very fast. My sister's screamings, and then suddenly this huge hairy woman emerges from nowhere. Her calves are completely covered in mud. She lunges towards the crocodile, grabbing it by the tail, so it can't move forward. She straddles the crocodile. Hands are pressed down heavily on his head. She rips open his jaws, tearing them apart with a walloping snap. Me and my sister could not believe what we were seeing with our naked eyes. She killed that crocodile as if it was a mere walk in the park. No big deal. The hairy lady was very strong. I think I must have been 8 years old at the time, but believe me, young man, you don't forget something like that in a hurry. I remember she was very tall, covered in mud, her hair tangled. It was long and dark and wet. Her face was remarkably human. She looked at me with her dark, kind eyes and asked us if we were both all right, in her strange language. Ipaki sobo okolani. Yet we understood what she was saying. We nodded. She then pulled the crocodile by the tail, dragging it through the trees back to the marsh. I guess she was going to eat it. I remember she smelled quite niffy from the marsh, but she was so nice to us. Me and my sister looked at each other in awe. You see, to us this powerful woman was like an angel sent from God. We did not find it odd that she was so different to your average human being. At that young age, you're so much more accepting of the idiosyncrasies of life. I raced back to tell our grandparents that a giant hairy lady had killed a big crocodile, but my grandparents did not believe a word of it. I remember taking great offence when you're little and you tell your elders a true story, and they refuse to believe you. It can be crushing. My sister said, "Granny, it's true. The big hairy lady snapped the crocodile's jaws. She killed the crocodile because the crocodile wanted to eat Carl, and the hairy lady saved him." I remember my grandmother reached forward to examine our foreheads, as if we were coming down with some very strange, peculiar disease that had in some way punctured our reasoned sense of thinking. "They're both very hot," she told her husband. "I think they've got a bit of heat stroke. That's why they're saying all these very strange things. Too much sun can do strange things to the mind, and our grandkids are not used to so much heat." "But it's true," my sister protested. "It's true, Granny." She stamped her feet indignantly. "Why won't you believe us? Why won't you believe us?" "It's not that I don't believe you, sweetheart," my grandmother had said, "but it's a very hot day out there, and you've got a touch of heat stroke, that's all. And when you're hot, you can see things, sweetheart, that aren't really there." My grandparents had occasionally had crocodiles coming onto the property. It wasn't that unusual. On one occasion, my grandfather trapped one in his wheelie bin, took it right back to the marsh, dumping the creature back where it belonged. Wow, that's an incredible story, I say. "It is, isn't it, son?" Of course, years later, I was to realise we'd met the skunk ape. I do remember she didn't smell great, but she didn't stink like a skunk either. I'd hardly call her an ape. Her face was so human. Ever since that extraordinary incident, I kept my mouth tightly shut. I knew people would never believe our account. So you learn to keep your mouth shut. I would do the same if I were you, son. People might ridicule you if you tell them your story. But I know what you told me is true. Carl Sullen was true to his word. He dropped me outside the hospital, but insisted on waiting for me. "I can drop you at your father's home afterwards," he said. "I'm sure the hospital won't let you see him at this time of night. But see if you can have that head of yours looked at." "My head will be fine," I told him, "but I need to see if I can see my dad. But you're right, it's late, and if you really don't mind waiting for me, I'd be very grateful." "You can bet on it."
When I walked through the hospital doors, there was a skeleton staff on duty, and a woman frowned when she saw me approach her desk. "How can I help you?" she said, with an air of sarcasm to her voice. "I'm here to see my father. He was brought in this afternoon. He had a stroke." "With the greatest of respect, son. It's 11 o'clock at night. Visiting times are now over. You can come back in the morning. We don't receive visitors at this late time. Our patients need to sleep." "No, but you don't understand," I explain, tears seeping from the corners of my eyelids. "I simply must see my father. I need to check he's all right." "I think you will find I do understand, young man. My father had a stroke. I've hitchhiked here. I left at 6 o'clock this evening. I want to see my dad desperately. Please, I want to look at him, to see if he's all right, to check he's still breathing. It's very important." The woman sighs, glances through her computer. "Name?" she says. "My father's name is Francis Alinsky. We call him Frank." The woman picks up her telephone. "Yes, can I speak to Nurse Carter?" "Hello, Carter. It's me, Beryl. That's right. Yes, I know it's not customary to have visitors at this crazy time, but I have an overwrought young man here who hitchhiked to the hospital from a long way away. He's frantic about his father, who had a stroke this afternoon. A Francis Alinsky, who calls himself Frank. That's right. He came in this afternoon with a stroke. Is it possible for him to just pop in to see his father?" "Yes," she says into the phone. "I understand. Thank you." My heart sighs. I think she's going to tell me to bugger off and come back in the morning, but she doesn't. She's a human being, after all. "Your father's doing very well, I'm told. Just go up to the 3rd floor. Nurse Carter will be waiting for you. But you can't be more than 5 minutes, mind. I'm stepping out of a limb for you. My job could be in jeopardy, so be discreet about it. Will you hurry?" "Thank you. I will," I said. "I won't be long." I hurry towards the lifts and navigate my way to the 3rd floor. The nurse is in his scrubs. He's standing there waiting for me. He gives me a warm, friendly smile. "You hitchhiked here? I am impressed. Come, let me show you your father. He's fast asleep, I'm afraid. I'm not sure he's going to wake up. He's had quite a powerful sedative. They brought him in this afternoon. I saw him myself. He was talking coherently from the word go. So I think he's going to make a full recovery." "You do?" I ask, hanging on to his reassuring words like a lifeboat. "I wouldn't say so confidently if I didn't think so. I've been in this line of work for over 8 years now, and you get a feel for these things. Come with me." I follow Nurse Carter down the long, quiet corridors of white vinyl flooring, where everything is dappled in a subdued light, and there are very few night staff on duty. I notice all the hospital rooms we pass are bathed in a dark light. "He's in here," says the nurse, leading me into the hospital ward, with about 4 other beds. Nurse Carter points to the sleeping figure of my father. "That's him. I'll give you some privacy for a few minutes, although I'm not sure you're going to wake him up. Good luck, son, trying." I walk over to my father's side of the bed, pulling up a chair. I notice he has a drip attached to his arm, but I'm relieved to see he looks just like my dad, and I'm reassured by the rise and fall of his chest that he is indeed breathing. "Dad," I say, giving him a gentle shake. "Dad, are you awake? It's me, Simon. I've been so worried about you." My father sits up with a start. "Where am I?" he says, looking around the hospital room, blarily. "Dad, you're in hospital, don't you remember? You had a stroke this afternoon. Mrs. Thornton phoned me, so I came as soon as I could. Although it's way past visiting hours, I'm afraid. But I managed to persuade the kind lady in reception to let me visit you for a couple of minutes. She agreed." "I'm fine, son. Absolutely fine. It is good to see you, but you shouldn't have come all this way. Isn't it funny? I was dreaming about you before you woke me up. You were driving that old beat-up Mustang of mine, and you gave me a lift. We were on our way to see your mother. Isn't that funny? Your mum's been dead for years, but the dream, it was so lucidly vivid." I look at my father agog. I dreamt the same thing earlier on in the afternoon. This day was proving to be curiously bizarre, leading from one peculiarity to another. like an enigmatic, cryptic road map. To cut a long story short, I'm very glad to say my father made a full recovery from his stroke. As to why he had a stroke still remains a mystery to me, as he had no underlying health conditions. Of course, I received a huge lecture from Mrs. Thornton, who didn't approve of the fact that I'd hitchhiked all the way to see my father. As I expected, she told me a plethora of stories about the unfortunate hitchhikers that had met their gruesome end when being lifted by a stranger. "You're very lucky, young man, to be in one piece. God only knows what half-crazed person could have picked you up." Little did she know, I had quite the hitchhiker's journey on that road, but the less said about that the better. What I will say is my indelible memory of my bizarre adventure still remains crystal clear in my mind, and as Carl Sullen suggested, I have kept the story close to my heart and shared it with no one until now. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.